the software we use daily just is like not working, which is super tight. And I it's a Friday, and I'm God Almighty.
Mm. That's the ideal, like, that's mindset, you know? And I tell you what, I'm right there with you because my tummy hurts a little bit. I got
Oh, no.
heartburn. This is the worst pain that anyone has ever suffered. So,
Oh, you poor
your
baby.
thing, yeah, exactly, right? I am. Your thing is cool too, but I'm here busy experiencing the worst thing that's ever happened to anyone, which is stomach
Your
hurt
little
a little
tum
bit.
tum. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, exactly.
I felt kind of crappier earlier today, but I feel good now.
I'm gonna drink myself into a coma.
I feel like I just. Oh, hello.
Hello.
Oh, I'm back. Look
Cirrhosis
at that.
death live on air.
Sorry, my internet cut out for a little while there, so I wasn't entirely sure whether I was audible.
Okay. How are you doing?
I am happy that my semester is over, but I've also consumed way too much caffeine for the amount of sleep I got last night. So I'm feeling like I might start like jumping or something. Yeah.
Oh, fun.
Welcome. Yeah, wait till you get to your 30s there, bud.
Hello, and welcome to Well, There's Your Problem. It's a podcast about engineering disasters with slides. I'm Justin Rosniak. I'm the person who's talking right now. My pronouns are he and him. Okay, go.
I am Alice Caldwell-Kelly. I'm the person who's talking now. My pronouns are she and her. Your 30s are atrocious. 40s are probably going to be worse. Yay, Liam.
Hey, Liam. I feel great. I'm in a good mood. Things are going well here. I am not sort of having some sort of rage breakdown. Yeah, I feel great. My pronouns are he, him. I feel like dog shit. Let's get through this. And we have a guest.
Yeah.
Guest.
Hi, I'm Uday. My pronouns are he and him.
Outstanding. How are you all feeling?
Yeah.
Fuck you, man. That's how I'm feeling.
Yeah.
That's not me misgendering Alice. That's just man as a declarative.
It's man as in mankind. Yeah. Like all 7-8 billion.
Yeah, all
the gender neutral man.
Yeah, down the toilet where we belong.
Well, what you see on the screen here is a freight train carrying FedEx trailers, and what you might notice
trailers.
Yeah, FedEx trailers.
Fat ass.
Trailers.
That's short for Federal Express.
Yeah. Oh, she thick.
If we wouldn't get extremely sued, I would like us to do a Federal Express t-shirt or something.
Isn't there something about parody where you're allowed to do that sort of thing?
Oh, they'll sue us, Uday.
Yeah.
They will sue us.
The Federal Express Corporation does not give a shit about parody laws or indeed anything else. They would, they would be assassinating us moment one after that.
They don't have to win the lawsuit to majorly inconvenience
One of the many things you'll learn following housing is that the lawsuit itself is can be the problem.
You have those anti-slap laws, which definitely still work, right? So
the now the problem with this freight train, you might notice, shown here parked on the world famous Horseshoe Curve outside of Altoona, Pennsylvania, is that it's on its side.
That's not good.
It's not supposed to be like that.
When you told me about my favorite synonym in the railway industry, when you said that Amtrak put a train on the ground.
Yeah, it's not supposed to be there.
Yeah, so they did some multi-track drifting up here on the top.
No, it's just one.
Yeah. I noticed the track itself is like all over the place. It's kind of all squiggly.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Impermanent way.
Yeah.
It's not good.
And this malleable way is not what you want.
Transient way,
That's not the sort of flexibility you're looking for in systems design. Yeah.
Listen, buddy, it's shifting like water.
What we're going to do today is we're going to sort of go over like a broad overview of the state of the freight rail industry as relates to, causing the recent potential railroad strike, which of course Joe Biden averted and solved every problem on the railroad by doing so. Right. That's what we're going to do. We're going to do it from kind of maybe less of a labor perspective and more from just a top-down view of the state of the railroad, because a lot of people have done a lot of work on labor recently.
Sure.
But
and if you're listening to this, you have an idea of like, well, you're on the side of the angels, right? You know what the labor issues are here.
Yes.
You want people to have sick days. You want people to be able to like know when they're going to work or have some idea. But there's a lot of technical shit going on here as well.
Yeah.
We're giving you a different part of the same picture.
We should definitely put the links to some of the excellent reporting though in the description for this, because there really has been quite a good stuff.
Yeah. But before we dive into this and bore everyone to death with a lot of technical stuff, let's do the goddamn news.
I did get it to fade out after all. Yeah, so man's hubris has once again created possibly one of the funniest things that we've ever we get sent shit when shit like this happens. About 5 million people send it to us. We have to do a thing on the podcast Twitter account that's like, yeah, we know about this. This has been the best one so far. There's a hotel in Berlin that, as part of the sort of like victory lap of capitalism in the 90s, decided to build a tower that could reach even unto God, right? They decided to build...
And then they filled it with fish for some fucking reason.
a big fish tank full of tropical fish, 1,500 tropical fish. It has an elevator going up through the middle of it. It's in the lobby because, like, when you're in a hotel, you really need a giant fish tank. I
view this as a victory for myself.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't have done it without you, patrons. Thank you. Together we will defeat the fish menace.
What happened, and we know not why, I think, yet, is the fish tank fucking exploded. The fish tank is gone.
Yes.
1,500 tropical fish are dead. This happened at like 4 a.m, so no one died, no humans anyway, only many fish. But yeah, the whole thing just collapsed. Now the lobby of this thing is like flooded with water and dead fish. We've all learned a valuable lesson about hubris. And
I'm just waiting for the security cam footage to leak.
Yes.
I want to see that security cam footage.
I enjoy the genre of leaked security cam footage because, like, just the filmmaking conventions there of sort of guy recording a screen on his phone. There's usually like a guy pointing at the screen with his finger or a pen or something.
It's usually just a silhouette of the finger. You don't actually ever see the pointing guy. Yeah.
You might get some like sort of muted conversational audio in the background that's like, oh damn, that's where they fucked up. Fantastic. I saw one of those where it was like a sluice gate jammed open in a salmon fishery factory. And one guy sort of took the initiative to wade through the flood of salmon to like turn it off at the source. And the whole time in the recording, you can hear the people in the office going like, who is that guy? Like, he's a superhero. Possibly some German man had to do likewise with this and like stem the tide. But like, I never got the appeal of this. Every time I've ever checked into a hotel, I've been like half dead anyway. And I don't know what like a beautiful lobby, or in this case, a lobby full of 1,500 tropical fish is meant to do other than inspire you to think, God damn, that's a lot of fish.
Yes.
I'm just imagining waking up in the morning in one of those rooms that looks onto the courtyard.
Oh, that smell must be something special.
Opening your curtains and just seeing that wreckage.
Do I get a refund on this?
I just wanted to note, this is called the AquaDom Hotel.
Oh, yeah.
Which implies the existence of an aqua sub-hotel.
Yeah. But it's a submarine. It's not a sexual thing. It's just a submarine.
Yeah, which implies the existence of a dom marine.
Stop it. No, it doesn't.
This is true. This is
listen,
true.
If you go on Grindr outside military bases, you will know that there is no such thing as a dom marine.
Oh.
They're all bottoms. They have an entire branch of bottoms, which is representation, you know.
Yes. In other news.
Yeah, please.
Go.
You get it?
Slide.
Dude, God.
Oh, there we
damn it,
go.
I'm
There we
gonna
go.
kill myself.
So much like us in this presentation, Elon Musk, a man who is having some
A normal one.
difficulties, some problems, a man who is speedrunning the experience of being a forum mod in sort of like a rowdy forum full of malcontents in like 2005.
Yes.
Yeah.
His new thing is, you may have recall when he took over Twitter, his bit was comedy is legal, free speech is legal. I am a libertarian. You can trust me 100%. I'm a nice libertarian wallet inspector, and I'm so ruthlessly committed to free speech that I'm even keeping up the account that tracks the public ADSB data tracking the location of my private jet. This lasted until it didn't, because Elon Musk is a hypocrite and a baby, and
Twitter Spaces isn't real anymore. That's a new one.
Yes, yeah, because some. So I'm not actually sure what happened with this. He claims someone like threatened the life of his absurdly named child, and was able to do so by tracking the location of his private jet, even though they
Probably not.
like, no, almost certainly not.
No,
If you're
probably
worried
not.
about it, fly
Yeah.
commercial, fuck you, stop lying. And then in response, banned the account, banned the guy who operated the account, banned a bunch of journalists who like wrote about it at all. And then when those same journalists like got together in a Twitter space, he joined it, got asked one question, stammered over his words for a bit, rage quit, and deleted Twitter Spaces. So he's doing great.
Yeah, he's doing fantastic. I mean, I enjoy this management style. I think it's really drawn me back to the platform. It renews my interest and commitment to it, because it's just really funny to see what he'll do next.
Yeah.
And you're going to make a huge ad buy, which is going to offset all of the sort of like executives from
We are?
Unilever or whatever.
That's what our Patreon money is going to go to. We're going to put it all into. Well, there's your problem, advertising on Twitter.
That's right. We're going to get everyone, all of the crypto guys, all of the weird nerds. We're going to get them all listening to us.
Yeah.
Don't you want to learn more about Elon? Please.
He could be a bonus episode by himself at this point.
That would actually be
this is
funny.
true, actually.
But he's genuinely like spiraling sort of like mentally, and you know, I refer back to my previous joke, which is you should see what happened to the last guy who tried to make me pay to post, because he might get there. He might do the low tax speed run, and you know, maybe.
I don't think he'll do that. I don't think he'll go that far. But he will wind up losing his fortune in a stupid Chapter 11 proceeding.
He has kind of already done this. He's not the richest man in the world anymore. He's like dropped a second after the guy who owns
Tesla
the like
stock just been going just like down.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, hit a new 2-year low today.
Well, the Tesla business model isn't going to be viable pretty soon, because everyone's going to be able to claim those EV credits.
I knew that like the big automakers would get him eventually, not least because Tesla like barely makes cars, but they really have sort of an extra impetus to do it now. I don't know if Twitter's going to survive. I don't know what the next thing after Twitter is going to be. I'm going to keep posting till the end, though.
Yeah, me too. I'm I'll go on Mastodon if absolutely forced to.
No, fuck that. No,
but probably not. Oh, and if you
want to follow my
Instagram, actually, this is a public service announcement. Stop trying to fucking follow my private Instagram. You will not be accepted. Liam from WTYP. That's the one you hogs are allowed to follow.
The Liam like thought pics that are not,
absolutely fucking stop requesting my private facing Instagram account.
I didn't know the show had an Instagram. I'll have to follow that.
The show does have an Instagram, but I'm talking about my Instagram that's public facing.
Yeah.
People keep bothering me. It's like, no, I don't know you fucking people.
Don't put your name on your private Instagram. Just have it be something like just completely different.
Yeah. I moved to Tumblr as well. I'm doing that on Twitter. That's
wow,
I like that. Yeah. Crawling back on my knees. But I enjoy it.
The first Google result for Alice Avizandum is Alice Avizandum Islam and Alice Avizandum Cop.
That's right. Hey, at least the top hit isn't Kiwi Farms anymore. So thank you to Keffels for effecting that. Yeah, they're gonna have to drag me off of Twitter with like the big hook that they use for vaudeville performers. Only God can remove me from Twitter.
I've been trying to use Mastodon more in really the past few days. And it's
the modness of it is
that's the thing. Yeah. It just feels very fragmented.
What if Twitter had more mods and the mods were more capricious?
Yeah.
I don't want to like sort of get defederated and have to like, I can't control who I'm speaking to because like half of my followers has been removed by one mod who doesn't like that I don't content warning photos with eye contact in them,
That's fucked up.
Yeah, exactly. I get defederated and I have to ally myself with the Romulans.
Sort of map of the Holy Roman Empire and just be like, Mastodon instances. I think it's fine. Like Mastodon could be compelling, right? And it needs
neither social nor media nor a network.
That's right. Mastodon only needs a couple of changes to become a good replacement for Twitter. First of all, it needs prince bishops. Second of all, it needs electors. Third of all, the two of those get together and they elect an emperor. And then once we do that, it's all going to be good.
Yeah, that's what it's going to be. It's good.
We need a Charlemagne instance.
Yeah, I can't do Mastodon because I'm too mean on Twitter, I think.
You would get like defederated from everything.
Because I'm hateful.
Yeah, you would be on like sort of like the like one of the prison planets,
Yeah.
We're on some sort of like instance where like they've got the like electrified floors or whatever, so you can't post good.
Sure, that's fine. I don't post good anyway.
Isn't Truth Social technically a Mastodon instance, or am I making that up?
Oh my god, is it?
I think
I don't think so.
You don't think so? Okay.
I don't think so.
Truth
I might be making that up.
No, no, it's not.
Well, that was.
I mean, if this fails, we'll all go to like sort of ISIS-affiliated Telegram groups, and that way,
it uses a custom version of the free and open source social network hosting Mastodon as its backend. There you go.
Okay.
Of course, I like the ISIS Telegram group idea because it's the only social network that allows you to talk directly to federal agents.
This is true. Catch us on ISIS-affiliated Telegram groups in the next few months.
Yeah, it's going to be a bunch of guys who have been like all killed in airstrikes and like have had their accounts like harvested by scammers, and some feds and us.
Yes.
Yep.
Anyway, that was the goddamn news.
Beautiful photo here.
Oh yeah, this is very nice.
Barstow, California.
Ooh. I just before I wanted to begin here, sort of explain what we're going to do. I want to say there has been a lot of work done on the railroad strike so far, from the sort of bottom up labor focused view. If you want to go see all that stuff, I'm going to throw some links down in the description. Shout outs to Maximilian Alvarez at the Real News, Ross Gruters at Railroad Workers United, Jonah Furman at Labor Notes, Aaron Gordon over at Vice. And this is the really labor focused reporting, which is good. It's all been really great. I'm glad people have been covering this for a lot longer than mainstream media has, because this all sort of the mainstream media coverage has been lacking.
Would you call it the lamestream media?
I would actually. Yes.
The New York Times literally called you to be like, "What is a train? Explain what trains are."
This is true. Yes.
And I mean, you're a great person to call to do it, but it was very funny that they like sort of one day before possible imminent railroad strike, they're like, all right, who do we know who knows what a railroad is?
It's when the thing go on track. Anyway, what we're gonna do here is we're gonna give you a different part of the picture. We're giving our top-down neoliberal technocratic view of what's gone wrong and how to fix it. Right? Think of us as Pete Buttigieg.
Don't think of us like that. Don't fucking think of us like that. I will piss in your cereal. I will make like Pizza Boy and take all your bacon.
Yeah. No, that was Milkshake that did that.
Oh, my bad. I will make like Milkshake and take all your bacon.
Falsely accused.
Yeah, I was about to say. He's sitting here right on the desk. He heard that.
Good.
Yeah. So, all right,
Pizza
what
Boy
are
is
our...
my favorite milkshake.
Yeah. So, yeah, Milkshake's sitting over there on a radiator, so he heard that too.
I'm
It's just
very
really
tired.
like this is a failure of a diplomat here, as much as anything.
Mm-hmm.
So, all right, what are some of the problems facing the railroad? And the big one recently has been labor unrest, of course.
Mhm.
And that's the biggest and most immediate one.
Must call in the Pinkertons.
Yeah, obviously, Joe Biden averted that, and there'll be no negative fallout from that ever. All of those problems are fixed permanently now, right?
Thanks, Joe Biden.
Mm-hmm.
The other one is, we have disinvestment in a lot of the railroad. You have railroads not acting in the public interest most of the time. Trains are really late. Lots of safety practices have decayed to the point where, stuff is less safe than it used to be. And despite all this, the railroads are making oodles and oodles of cash, right? Loads of money. Just bringing them down, and in combination, all these problems are difficult to, trace out root causes and very difficult to fix, especially owing to the high profits aspect of it. But we're going to try and dive into the weeds here and sort of see how we got to where we are and how to fix it, if there's a way to fix it.
Ideally, not involving the Pinkertons and the stockpiled machine guns.
Yes.
I don't think you literally cannot squeeze labor any farther than you have squeezed them.
I mean, a machine gun is a great squeezing machine, right? Like we juiced a whole generation of doomed youth with those in the 1910s.
I mean, if you actually made a law that forced people to work for the railroad on a sort of corvée system, maybe.
All right, fuck it. Episode over. That's the plan.
Maybe you could squeeze labor further, but
I have to work on the sort of the Norfolk Southern encomienda.
Yeah, I've been drafted.
I don't want to be BNSF. I hate you, Warren Buffett.
I mean, that's what Reagan did.
I got my papers. I'm heading out to North Platte, Nebraska tomorrow for basic.
I mean, Reagan sort of did a variation of this with the air traffic controllers, right? Was he just militarized them, if I remember correctly? So
yes,
yeah. Fuck it. You drive a train. You're in the army now. We're bringing the USATC back.
Yeah, you can mobilize all 300 people in the U.S. Army Rail Transportation Corps.
I don't know if that still exists.
It's still an MOS. I don't remember what the number is.
Well, I mean, other countries have it. Like the Russian military has a railroad troops. They're probably not up to much right now. So you just
they have an order of magnitude more, probably 2 or 3 order of magnitudes more people.
No, I mean we should take them, right? We should encourage them to defect and just sort of apply them.
Militarized
to
train bureau. Yes,
we need we need Russians for our railroad.
What is it you always say about strippers on train tracks? What is it? The Rail Safety Administration's not going to like this one. It's like that.
So I guess our first thing is to go through some history. How did we get to where we are?
Not enough wildcat strikes.
Yeah.
That hasn't
not winning Blair Mountain.
Henry Clay Frick's secretary tackling Alexander Berkman a second too early.
Yes. So we'll start with some ancient history, right? And Uday, you wrote all these notes, so I defer to you.
So I mean, I'd say that I think a good way of framing the current issues with the railroad industry is that, in the broadest possible terms, the industry has had 2 sort of essentially ever-present problems. Number one, it is obsessed with a very particular sort of form of productivity, which is the operating ratio. The operating ratio is the ratio between sort of the expenses incurred in running a business and the revenues of that business. So the lower it is, the better it is. That obsession is actually has sort of an interesting history. There's a book for those who are really want to get into this, The Visible Hand by Alfred Chandler. And one of the things it talks about is how back in like the 1870s, railroads were like the big business. They were sort of the first, the pioneering corporate entities to have sort of scale and size that required like really intensive statistical management tools. And at that
for all intents and purposes, they invent capitalism.
Yeah,
Right.
basically,
And management, right?
And managerialism, exactly, yeah. So in having that responsibility, one of the things they obviously needed to do is figure out a way to sort of measure how well they were doing, how much money they were generating for themselves and their shareholders. At that time, people, in the 1870s and 1860s, there wasn't really any great way of figuring out exactly how much all of the infrastructure you own was worth. And certainly, I think I'm not as certain about the whole history of like depreciation accounting and all that. But basically, the upshot of all this is that instead of trying to look at return on investment, so how much money you're making relative to the money you've invested in what you have, they decided to look at the ratio between expenses and earnings as sort of the key metric.
Because every manager wants to like stride into their office and say, to borrow a line from Kill James Bond, "Give me good numbers, Jimmy." Right?
Yeah.
But like, the question then is what numbers are you trying to get?
Exactly.
And so,
yeah,
sure.
Railroads ended up with, as I understand it from this sort of like dead end theory of management and like operating expenses that like they just kept.
Yeah. So basically,
because it gave them good numbers.
Well, so yeah, basically it's an easy number to calculate, and as railroads invented things like like divisional structures and management. They took some inspiration from the military, and as these sort of tentacles of managerialism extended and got more complicated, it's really easy to, or really not really easy, but relatively easy to figure out how much money you're spending on different parts of the system and on different types of train service. So operating ratios were just easy to calculate. And because of that, they were obviously something that railroad managers became sort of used to looking at, but they were also something that investors became really used to looking at. So by the 1880s and 1890s, you open up Wall Street Journal issues from then, and you'll see, little like columns written in very fancy English talking about, how like the Pennsylvania Railroad had this operating ratio and the Erie had that operating ratio, and whatever financial analyst was writing this thought about those operating ratios relative to what they could be. And even back then, that created problems. I'm going to read this long, but I think useful quote from Railway Age on November 8th, 1901. It says, "Were the question only a matter of comparison upon which to base values, present or prospective, the use of the operating ratio would be of comparatively little consequence. But so long as the capacity of men is to be judged by this factor, so long with the average railroad manager will it work against the best interest of the road. It is not only easily conceivable, but not infrequently happens that under certain conditions, net earnings may be materially increased by the handling of certain traffic, which, because of low rates, may disproportionately increase the operating ratio. To augment one's net earnings 5% and at the same time increase one's operating ratio 10% is a proposition that has caused many a railroad manager to sacrifice his earnings for the sake of maintaining his reputation. And even in these days of enlightened railway management, such men are sometimes employed to operate railroads because of their demonstrated abilities to reduce the operating ratio to a low limit. It is unfortunate that the loss of traffic resulting from such an attempt cannot be determined. The traffic man who deals with this side of the question is painfully conscious of the condition of affairs, but he can neither demonstrate nor overcome it. All he can do is to grin and bear it until such a time as, having established his reputation for a low operating ratio, the operating official is called to other fields at a higher salary." So
we do this in like all different forms of management now. Like this is the line, right? Like the line has to go up, and we do everything in service of the line, even if it destroys our own company.
Exactly.
This is this like weird antiquated 1870s line. It's like a line in like written with a quill pen.
And honestly,
in this case, it's you want the bar to be shorter.
Exactly.
Shown on this chart. And everyone wants to be Pittsburgh and Lake Erie here with an operating ratio of 49. because they move one type of traffic to one destination,
Exactly.
which is steel to Lake Erie.
It's a very small feedback loop in that if you have to draw the line less, you use less ink, which means less expense on ink.
Precisely. True. Yeah. And I mean, honestly, the relationship between the operating ratio and like bad managerial incentives is not like, you don't need to know like shit about railroading to understand how it works. You know, like if you're just looking at the operating ratio, it's better to be, you know, a railroad that carries like coal for one customer and then makes like a massive margin on it than one that carries like a much larger and more diverse type, you know, set of freight, you know, with 10 times the revenue, but, you know, has a lower margin because of it.
As I said, the Pittsburgh and Lake Erie here,
exactly.
You know, it's a very small railroad, but by this metric, it's the best one.
Yeah. Let me read my favorite Hunter Harrison quote, actually. Hunter Harrison, and we'll get to this later, was sort of the intellectual father of modern precision scheduled railroading. But he wrote in Railway Age in June 1996, all other things equal, particularly with respect to return on capital, I would rather be a $2 billion company with a 70% operating ratio than a $700 million company with a 50% operating ratio. It's simple math. So like
not that simple, seemingly.
Yes.
Yeah.
No, I mean,
it's even the people who are like.
One thing that's interesting to me is, and I'm just sort of like drifting off into my own fantasy land here, is that like we have all of these examples of like managerialism, and like the thing that I always go to is like strategy games, simulation games, management games.
Yeah,
I've never seen it done where one of those has like changed the information that is available to you as a player, like the way that you categorize it, the way that you think of like something doing well is, in order to like change the way you play it. And I think that's something that like is really like, because that's what this story is, right? Is different ways of thinking about what a railroad should be and what a successful railroad looks like. And so all of these guys are like managing this to sort of like broadly well-intentioned ways. It's just that their intention is make bar graph smaller.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. And it's not even like these people themselves don't recognize the problem. I mean, that's Hunter Harrison in that quote, you know, who of course goes on to become like the operating ratio guy of the 21st century railroad. But he recognizes this is bad. But, you know, when your CEO pay is like tied to operating ratio performance, and when all the investors ask about on earning calls, or, you know, in the older days, like, you know, investor meetings is operating ratios, of course you're going to, you know, focus on the operating ratio, because it's just what we're all sort of conditioned, you know, and this is like a fundamentally social question, but we're conditioned to care about. You know, this isn't because the operating ratio is a good metric. It's in fact a really bad way to sort of design an entire sort of railroad operating paradigm.
I also feel like, you know, especially in a more modern era, when railroads are perceived to be in terminal decline, you know, the operating ratio is the only possible way that you could stave off, you know, the end. Because trying to get more traffic or trying to improve service, those are dead ends. You have to do this sort of chemotherapy, you know?
Yeah. Right. Is the cure worse than the disease? Right.
Yeah.
It's the last good number that you can show someone.
Yeah.
He might like be missing an arm, right? And he might have like a half pint of blood left in his body, but there is still a detectable heart rate, you know?
Yeah. And that blood is very productive now, because there's less.
Exactly. Well, exactly. It's doing so much work.
Yeah. You know, I think I told the story the last time I was on this podcast, but I'm going to repeat myself because, you know, well, I'm here again.
You do whatever you want, but
we've never done that.
But in the 1970s, I believe the Burlington Northern Board of Directors was voting on whether or not to build their line into the Powder River Basin. That line was going to, you know, end up becoming sort of an unbelievably sort of profit-generating extension
field in Wyoming.
Exactly.
For those of you who don't know.
Yeah, and again, we'll talk about this more later, but the people on the board of directors were so convinced that it was a bad idea that I think one of them actually resigned in protest over it, because they all just, you know, they thought railroading was a dead industry. The only way to, you know, that make money of it was just to, you know, stay the course and cut costs wherever possible, because that's easy. You know, you're not really putting anything on the line if you make your trains 10% longer or whatever. Which actually brings me to another point, right? You know, to what Alice was just saying about changing the information available. You know, people had that thought. And there is exactly one moment in American railroad history where anyone actually did something with that. And you know who that someone was? It was the federal government. In 1918, when they nationalized the railroads, they did so under sort of the auspices of a bunch of essentially just like managerial eggheads who were like really obsessed with scientific management and really sort of ensconced in like sort of academic debates about good railroad practice at that time. And they appointed this guy.
Progressive Taylorism.
Yes, exactly. We're gonna make managerialism better by giving it better numbers and also controlling workers more. But yes,
and we're going to measure the shapes of their skulls.
Exactly. Yeah, it was just a wonderful time in American history. But they appointed this guy. I think is William Cunningham. I think his name was. He was a Harvard professor. I actually don't know if he was a professor before or after that. But he was appointed as sort of like the statistical chief of the nationalized, railways, the United States Railway Administration. And in that position, he came up with a sort of standard statistical reporting form for all railroads that included, the obvious things, revenues, expenses, etc. It included the metric that they used then to measure themselves, which was, average train length. So, as now, everybody back then was like, oh, make the trains longer and then we'll run fewer trains and we'll make more money. But he added to that a bunch of new metrics that he made up, which were ones that had to do with speed. So, before, like if you read the Pennsylvania Railroad's annual report from like 15 or 16, they don't measure average speed or any sort of speed related variables at all. And this guy, Cunningham, forced all the railroads to start reporting speed metrics. So, the number of miles cars traveled in a day, the average speed of trains. He came up with this crazy metric, gross ton miles per train hour, which is...
What?
Yeah. But anyway...
I quite like this one.
Yeah. But I mean, the upshot of all this was that in the 1920s, these metrics were eventually sort of taken up by management and people realized, gee, these things might actually be useful. And then also the ICC mandated that railroads report them. In the 1920s, there was this period.
The Interstate Commerce Commission for the listeners. Yeah. We'll talk more about them later.
Yeah, definitely.
Positively, I assume.
Yeah, but again, sure. So after this era of nationalization, there's this period of time when there is a radical change in the sorts of things that railroads are investing in. Like you if you go and you read issues of railway age or railway signaling or whatever from that era, they're doing all these things that are essentially intended to reduce delays to trains and to improve train speeds and just again make sort of the whole network more fluid. And I think, again, to Alice's point about the sort of information available, almost all of these are being designed around sort of operating strategies that have gross ton miles per train hour or something like it at their heart. And so, yeah, I really think it is just kind of impossible to overrate the impact that sort of really sort of the values that are built within the numbers you choose to measure things with. It's kind of impossible to overstate the impact that can have.
Uday, you're sort of fading in and out.
Am I? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Is it better now?
I don't know if it's better now. I don't know if you're moving your head back and forward or something.
I got up.
That's what it sounds like.
I got up to close the door, so maybe that was it.
Yes,
that'll do that.
Yeah. How could you do that?
I don't know. Anyway, I'm back now. I'll sit still.
Yeah. Okay.
But yeah, I mean, point being, I think I don't know how much of that got through, but hopefully some of it did.
I think all of it probably did.
Okay,
yeah,
it'll just sound weird after leveling the volumes.
Fucking rather dumb faces. Yeah. You all should be grateful you get anything. How angry I am right now.
Anyway, point being, there was this period of time when sort of the legacy of railroad nationalization in statistics had this very positive impact on sort of the things that railroads chose to emphasize. Now, of course, later on that we sort of return to railroads' old ways and we start thinking a lot more about train length, and we miss some of I think railroad managements end up missing a lot of the sort of more systemic points of what Cunningham was trying to do with speed. And that all again informs later parts of the stories. But the history of sort of railroading and the history of the numbers with which we railroad. Yeah. incredibly important to link. That sort of brings me to the third point here, which is that, productivity-oriented railroad managerial strategies have historically been very good at reducing the cost of moving trains between terminals. So, we got bigger steam locomotives, and we got diesel locomotives, and we got bigger freight cars.
But does it make them any more efficient at unloading those things?
Exactly. So
right, okay.
It's the operations in and around and through terminals and like complex junctions have always sucked. And that's because, it's a lot of the time, and I don't think this is necessarily like a universal quality of sort of terminal problems, but a lot of the time terminal problems involve sort of complex inter-stakeholder coordination problems, whether that be between railroads and the shippers receiving goods, railroads and like freight forwarders, or whoever's taking the freight, to some customer that doesn't have a rail siding, between, multiple railroads, between railroads and sort of the municipalities they're running through, et cetera, et cetera. And managerial strategies that are, internally facing and are often, again, sort of fascinated with just, make line go up or make line go down, aren't so good at parsing that kind of complexity. And that has, historically been immensely sort of impactful for railroads. Back in the 19 teens, it cost 13 times more to get a car from Jersey City to New York City on a barge than it did to get that car from Philadelphia to Jersey City. Just because, it's moving. Yeah, like moving, like, and that's obviously some of that's just the unique New York City, like, you need to put freight cars on a barge to get them to New York problem. But
you need to like stop in front of a bunch of guys who are walking here.
Yeah.
Listen to our West Side Elevated Highway episode.
It's a great episode.
For more about that.
Meat cube.
Yeah.
Meat cube. Meat deck. Meat deck. Sorry.
The meat deck.
Meat deck.
But yeah, I mean, it's also
meat deck.
The issue is not just that, but it's also like, you're moving the freight cars in like 3 or 4 different train yards, and you have all these different moving parts and crews, and it's just a much more complicated problem than figuring out how to make things move quickly and efficiently between terminals. Now, if you want a more current example, there's, of course, Chicago. You can get a car from Los Angeles to Chicago, like a freight car or an intermodal container, in about the same amount of time it takes to get that car through Chicago and onto an East Coast railroad. And that's
depressing.
And that inefficiency, I mean, it's first one of the many reasons why so many intermodal containers are taken off of trains and then trucked to a different intermodal terminal and then loaded back onto a train in Chicago, which of course causes an unbelievably large number of emissions and environmental justice problems.
And it's resulted in like these bizarre decisions, like Norfolk Southern has decided to completely level a neighborhood to expand their intermodal yard so that they can receive these trucks full of containers that came off of a train somewhere else in Chicago.
Like 10 miles away.
What you're going to do is you're going to like take this off of the train. We've built like a huge crane to do this. We're going to put it on the truck, take it on the truck. You're going to drive it 2 blocks. Then we have another crane there. We're going to put it onto a different train. This is
called efficiency.
Exactly.
Occupation that we're doing.
But you're hiring a drayage driver that you're paying an effective negative wage. So you're making money.
Exactly. And, it's actually funny. One of the first uses of trucks in sort of American transportation was moving less than carload freight between different railroads terminals in like places like Cincinnati. Like I remember reading for my thesis some article about, it was Cincinnati actually, about like some very excited trucker who wrote an article in one of these freight trade journals, like, look at all the great things that trucking's going to do. We, instead of having to, keep the stuff on trains and, spend 3 days waiting for your freight to get moved in with, within the Cincinnati terminal area, you can just unload it from the train, put it on a truck, and then put it back on a different train and save all that time. And I mean, again, like, time is a flat circle in railroading, nothing ever changes. And I think, to be fair, some of that is path dependency, right? I mean, going back to the Norfolk Southern example that Justin just cited, one of the main interchange points for intermodal freight going across the country between sort of the Norfolk Southern network and then, the railroads to the west is one of the old yards that used to handle like livestock for the stockyards in Chicago. And that's obviously a facility that's not laid out terribly well. I mean, they've made it work, but it's not, perfectly aligned to the needs of
It's laid
the
out
modern...
well to kill a shitload of cows. What are you complaining about?
And
It's going
just
to bring
handle
that
like
back.
blocks of livestock traffic.
No, they decentralized that industry. They now kill cows everywhere as opposed to at one central location. We're
And
receiving
your state gets to you a lot more tender.
We're receiving the diffuse effects of that evil as opposed to having it concentrated in the cities.
Absolutely, yeah. There's a really sort of important labor story to that change as well, but I mean, that's another episode. Great book also, Shane Hamilton's Trucking Country, which talks all about sort of rural trucking and that ascendancy of that particular geography of cattle killing. Anyway,
or you could read The Jungle by Upton Sinclair and read a lot of like dubious sort of things about Serbian immigrants.
It was much easier to do an expose on that sort of thing when the stockyards were concentrated as opposed to now being very diffuse, and they hire a bunch of illegal immigrants to come to a town in the middle of nowhere and run the slaughterhouse.
And they get mad at them.
But on the other hand, in the 1920s, you could be racist in a sort of much weirder way about the illegal immigrants. So, swings and roundabouts.
This is also
you could be
true,
like,
yes.
the hands of the filthy Serb are touching your meat, and imbuing it with like orthodoxy.
Yeah, but the Serbs invented bread and the fork, Alice.
Hey, listen, I'm just reporting what Upton Sinclair wrote,
I'm just
which is
the same racist insults.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. I'm just engaging in racist tropes against Serbs.
The Scottish are a Turkic people.
Listen, all Scots are part of sort of the greater Bosnian diaspora. We're not sort of relitigating this here.
All right.
Uday, you brought like quite a serious presentation with like a shitload of graphs, and I'm just here like, you know what the thing about Serbs is?
Yeah, trying to replicate a Balkan YouTube comment section.
Albanian is dog. Precision scheduled railroading is invented in Montenegro.
Sometimes it's all about sort of like finding cosmic balances of various sorts. So
this is true.
Yeah.
This is an Enver Hoxha quote.
Sure.
Yeah.
Anyway, where are we? We're done with the slide.
I think you're on your last bullet point here about consolidation.
Oh yeah. So one of the other things almost like the corollary. Is it corollary? I don't know. I should know this, but I don't. Corollary. Yes. Okay.
Toyota corollary.
Sort of the corollary to railroads being very bad at sort of managing the collective action problems that arise at like terminals or junctions or any place where they're interchanging cars with each other, is that it is very good for railroads to merge. Mergers mean that railroads duplicate each other less. So if you have like one really good line and one really terrible line between two cities, you can use the good line instead of having a bunch of traffic go by the bad line. And then also instead of having traffic sit for 3 days in a city where it's being interchanged between carriers, you can just have a train that runs through the city between the two carriers, because it's just easier to manage once it's merged into one cohesive system. So in recognition of both of those benefits, the service benefits and the let's get rid of some of this very destructive competition benefit, there was a lot of talk in the 1920s 1910s and 1920s about sort of doing a planned consolidation of the railroad system in the entire U.S. To reduce the number of carriers and make larger, more sort of financially and operationally stable networks. And for a variety of reasons, that did not end up panning out.
Because they hated each other.
Yeah, they hated each other. Congress didn't give the ICC, the Interstate Commerce Commission.
Protestants.
Every railroad executive was very enthusiastic about the concept of merger as long as they came out on top.
Exactly.
Right.
And
it's the Holy Roman Emperor again.
It's just it's just guns to everybody's heads.
It was a feudal system ultimately. The railroads were competing with each other, undermining each other like feudal states.
Yeah. And the rivalries were also just very personal. Yeah.
Yes. ICC is supposed to fly in like Charlemagne and consolidate everything in the Transportation Act of 1920, but turns out they're not that good.
Yeah, and they're not authorized to do it either. Congress didn't give them the powers. Yeah.
Once again, the problem is the goddamn prods.
Yeah.
So anyway, that sort of doesn't happen. And
moving swiftly on from the prod bashing. Goddamn Apple Watch. Goddamn Apple Watch, dude.
I've lost my notes again. There they are.
Your Apple Watch flashes up a notification like it's time to be racist against Protestants.
It's not being racist. Dude, if any fucking group on the planet deserves to be hated, it is Protestants. Oh, I can't wait for the comments to this. Shut the fuck up.
Anyway, so you don't get any sort of consolidation at the national level. You also don't really get much effort much successful effort to consolidate terminals at the sort of regional level. There are a lot of planning efforts, including in New York, to you guys can be your own, competitive carriers outside of this region. But within this region, all of you guys having like 9 different identical facilities is really bad for us because we're paying a lot more, for it, and we're losing a lot of like efficiency because of it. So you're going to cooperate. And those schemes don't really end up working that well either. The Port Authority in New York famously got its start as like this immense railroad rationalization and consolidation effort. And it achieves exactly nothing on that front and becomes sort of this, amorphous highway construction and port and airport development body.
Airport, World Trade Center builder.
Yeah, it's
the Austria of the Holy Roman Empire here.
Yeah, it's the famous book
producing
on
a Habsburg. Some sort of
just Port Authority
Habsburg
presidents getting like more and more inbreds. The last ones like the heads full of water.
It's full of chopped cheese.
Neither port nor authority, and not in New York.
We're gonna apply this to every organization we come to.
Yeah. So anyway, I think we can go to the next slide now, right?
Yes. We move into some more of the modern history, right?
Speaking of the Holy Roman Empire, we've got this fucking aristocratic family tree here.
Yes, this is very simplified, actually.
It's good
this
enough.
is how you build an inbred railroad. There's a lot of sort of like cousin fucking between all of these like small railroads that did one thing and had a sort of very low operating ratio because they were the railroad that moved hats from Danbury. Shout out to the New York Central.
That would be the New York, New Haven, and Hartford.
Excuse me.
Fuck yeah! I completely the Wizards of the Coast store that used to be there. Once again, I am begging you to go back to pre-Zendikar meta. Thank you.
The New Haven, moving hats becomes part of Penn Central, which does everything.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh my God! Wait, this chart is very wrong. It's missing all sorts of stuff.
It is missing a number of important things, but it was the best one I could find,
including the New York, New Haven, and Hartford.
Yes.
All right,
where am I going to get my hats from?
And there's some inclusions here which are interesting, like Pacific Electric when you're emitting.
I'm sorry. Yeah, the Akron, Kenton, and Youngstown is a cool railroad, but it does not merit inclusion when the New Haven is not being included. Yeah. All right, I'll be back in 1 second. I'm just getting myself some water.
Oh, you motherfucker!
I can still hear you. I have those wireless headphones. So
I am the way I think.
It's like a roaming uday,
A wild uday appears. What the fuck is going on in my house?
I don't know. I don't know what the fuck's going on in mine either. You know what? My stomach still hurts.
I'm back.
Hi.
I'm sorry your stomach hurts.
Do you drink a ginger ale or something?
Alright.
No, I just got a cup full of water with like tea residue in it because I was too lazy to get a new cup, so I'm just using my tea mug.
You're a monster.
This is sort of the glamorous lifestyle of the international podcaster.
Yes.
Oh boy.
So you had like in sort of more
house.
modern history, especially like post-war.
It's just correct.
Long distance trucking becomes more important. And
At
railroads
some
kind
point,
of
Liam, we're gonna get like a sort of on recording home invasion where you kill someone on the microphone.
Yes.
And you know what? When that happens, my promise to you, we'll publish it. That's
we will.
That's going on.
Will. We'll slap a content warning on there, but it will be going in.
This is like, hey, FYI, Liam fucking shoots and kills a guy in like minute 28 of this for being in his house.
Yes. And the railroad's response to trucking initially, because the trucking industry became sort of under the control of the Interstate Commerce Commission, they tried to convince the Interstate Commerce Commission to regulate it out of existence rather than try and compete, right? And this doesn't go very well, not the least of which because it was very easy if you owned trucks to not use like a trucking service, but simply own your own trucks to ship your own product, in which case you weren't regulated. Or, the Interstate Commerce Commission had sort of arbitrary rules about how they made rates based on sort of their own whims. We'll talk about that in a second. But
I love a whimsical federal bureaucracy.
Yes.
So this is sort of the railroads sort of fail to improve service to compete with trucking in any way. They just don't want to. They're sort of comfortable in their long-term monopoly position.
And their
the boss will be in Scrivener Road.
Yeah.
And I think it's also worth mentioning here that sort of productivity, or the very sort of specific productivity fixation they have, is very relevant to why they didn't improve service. If you're focusing a lot on sort of running longer trains and trying to, specifically minimize operating costs, you're not going to be pursuing things that might cost you more money, but also will win you more, like, sort of, higher value goods and more traffic. So you have railroads, responding to trucking with, what if we ran fewer longer trains? Wouldn't that be cool? Rather than be like, let's just create a network of like reliable, fast,
What if we did it the wrongest way? Yeah.
Exactly.
What if we did, and I'm pitching this to you, what if we did low speed rail?
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
I mean,
Alice,
it's no
congratulations, you're the board of CSX.
I'm doing the like slow food thing, or I'm like, you enjoy your train more authentically if it moves at 15 miles an hour.
Yeah, and you're in a situation here where, all of a sudden with the competition from trucking, there's like, okay, on the one hand, we could try and improve our service to compete. On the other hand, we have these things that trucking is taking away from us, like, I don't know, the way freight that stops in every town, drops off Farmer Brown's tractor and his new Sears kit house. We can just eliminate those now. Tell them fucking go use trucks. So this is a big factor in, like, especially in the Northeast where you had these dense rail networks. A lot of trains being discontinued, a lot of freight switching to trucks, just because not so much that railroads couldn't compete, but more they didn't want to.
I mean, critical support for like having a very easy and profitable job and like not wanting to do it.
Yeah, I'm lazy. I'll get to it later.
It's worth noting there were, in some cases, like there are, like, I think it is, in the most abstract terms, true that trucking is going to have an easier time running sort of fast and reliable service. Trucking is like, it's atomic, right? You put your freight, unless it's less than truckload freight, which is a different story. But, you put your freight on the truck, and then the truck drives and it gets to its destination, and then the freight is there, rather than having a bunch of, intermediate handling in yards and different freight trains and everything. So, I mean, it is true that, they had, trucking was likely going to capture the high end of the freight market. That said, I think, there's a mistake you often hear, I think, when I mean, especially I feel like when a certain flavor of economist talks about these things, where it's just, these advantages and disadvantages exist in sort of, a binary space where it's like, trucking is better in all cases, and railroad at doing these things, and railroads are better in all cases at doing these things. When actually it's more of a spectrum, right? Railroads might not have kept, the crates full of, I don't know, like diamond encrusted handbags or whatever, but they might have kept, some of the intermediately valuable stuff, appliances, or I don't know, like some sort of, auto parts or whatever it is, right? Stuff that is
some stuff that's only moderately time sensitive. stuff that's like, and also you're shipping in, maybe not bulk, but a lot of it. I mean, I feel like the complete loss of less than carload traffic is pretty crazy to think about.
Definitely, especially given
No,
sorry, go ahead.
Especially given how we live in this very much more urbanized society now, where those sorts of the ability to deliver a lot of parcels to a city center without using the roads would be very useful.
Yep. And I mean, I think, and it's interesting too, because even in the 50s and 60s, at that time they were basically inventing the sort of managerial tools of modern logistics. They were industrial, traffic managers were moving away from just asking, okay, what's the cheapest way to ship good X between point A and point B, and then choosing to do that, towards asking like, okay, well, maybe if we ship this thing, maybe if we have instead of having one truck or train a week that goes between these 2 points, if we had like shipments every day, we'd be able to save on warehouse space because you'd have less inventory in stock. So you have this sort of sectoral shift through the 50s, 60s, and 70s towards smaller, more frequent freight shipments. And of course, that becomes the underpinning of, what we all call just-in-time logistics today, which is, basically this concept, right? Optimize your transport network to minimize overall transportation costs, including, warehousing, including, I don't know, whatever else, like other factories you want to include in
Damn you,
equation.
Toyota.
Exactly. Yeah. So your freight railroads are pivoting towards the stuff that they can do most easiest, the bulk materials, the long hauls, at a time when the freight market is sort of heading in the opposite direction, and they have ways of squaring that circle, i.e. intermodal service, which, I mean, we'll talk about that more later. But I mean, I think it is worth recognizing that there really is this disjunct here. And it's one that only gets worse as railroads, start to lose money, and they, can't make improvements to their physical plans, which, just worsens the whole problem. But you obviously don't want to overstate like the fact that they were, or understate, I should say, the sort of somewhat anti-rail policy context that they were existing.
Getting a lot of mouth breathing on the mic. Ross, is that you?
Could be.
I think so. I'll do some so you don't feel lonely.
Thank you, Alice.
I help too.
Also, honestly, that's kind of how I feel. Like I've been hitting the mute button every time I need to like sort of double over and be like, if you want a sort of like insight into how I'm feeling.
Inside baseball, but it's just Alice's tummy's hurting.
Yeah, absolutely. I got like one finger paused on this mute button.
Another factor that kind of screws over the railroads is throughout the like the post-war era, industry becomes much more decentralized, and that makes it harder to serve by rail, because you're moving all these factories out of the city centers, you're moving them to big sprawling facilities, in the southeast, where you can have more atomized workforce, which is
less
non-union.
Unions, you
can pay people less, this whole thing. And because railroad efficiency is sort of proportional to sort of the density of railroad customers, these things become a lot harder to serve by rail because you need more infrastructure per facility. You got to run more trains, you got to do all this stuff. So this is a factor in shifting things from rail over to trucks. And again,
we've all
railroads
played sort of video games where you have to like put rail lines to stuff, and once there's too many, it gets complicated, and you don't want to do it.
Yeah.
Fucking Railway Empire, my nemesis.
Yep.
If I have to comprehend more than like 4 different goods moving across a network at any one time, I'll kill you.
Yeah, that's how I'm feeling right now. Is stop making me know things, I'll kill you.
Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting too because there's some historians.
Uday, tread lightly, buddy.
What?
Tread lightly, buddy.
Okay.
Oh, that's that Liam is threatening your life for making him know things.
Yes.
Okay.
Starts the sentence with "It's interesting that," and that implies that he's going to learn something in it.
I like learning. It's Friday. It's 5:13 on a Friday, and I could be getting drunk, but instead I'm listening to the insane ramblings of a madman.
Yes,
you can get drunk during this.
Normally I just listen to Roz talk, but now it's Roz and Uday, and there's a lot.
we've reached like some sort of escape velocity.
Mr. Handsome, buddy.
Yeah.
Gonna count the number of charts in the slides for this.
Too fucking many charts.
1, 2, 3,
This is what you get when you invite me on a podcast. I will bring a lot of fucking charts.
7, 8.
Oh,
Nine charts.
how far do we make it before podcast delirium set in? An hour and 5 minutes.
God. We're on slide 7 out of 25, by the way.
Some of the ones in the future should go shorter.
Yeah, definitely.
You always say this. They never do.
Yeah, you always say that, and it's always a lie.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you know, we're in it now. We're past the point of no return.
The only way out is through.
This is the part of the podcast where you spend 15 minutes of podcast complaining about the podcast is 2 hours.
That's right, and that's my human right.
That's what the people want.
It's like how airplanes carry fuel to carry fuel, you know?
Yes, yeah. It's the rocket tyranny of the rocket, you know?
Yeah,
exactly.
All the fucking downers who are like, man, why do you? It must be so hard being a podcaster. It's like, shut the fuck up, dude. I don't care.
This is the hardest job anyone has ever had, including the guy who fell into the hot acid vat.
Yeah.
That guy was a pussy compared to us.
Critical support for podcasters, I guess.
All right. Uday, complete your thoughts.
Here's the thing. I know that you're trying to get back on track, but at this point, picture yourself swimming away from some sort of shark.
Yep.
I am the shark, and I've suddenly grabbed one of your legs in my mighty jaws, and I am about to bring you below the surface.
Damn.
Where you will spend eternal night, because it's annoying Roz. You're kind of a innocent bystander here.
Damn.
Roz knows what he did to me.
Surprised you would be a fish, Liam.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. It's
especially given what happened to those poor fish in Germany.
They deserved it. Oh, they deserved it.
You just the thing is that Liam has evolved tonic immobility, which means that if you rotate him 90 degrees, he's not going to do shit to you. He's just going to be fine. You know,
if I lay down, I'm usually less violent. That is true.
Yeah.
All right, let's do it, Uday.
Let's go.
So the point I think making was that on top of the decentralization thing, there's also this thing that American industrialists get really into, which is just having like very small plants. After the 1930s, when like the mega factories, like River Rouge, for example, were
bonsai trees.
So are we talking just highly specialized plants, like the way Ford has like 9,000 suppliers for like 9,000 things?
Yeah, like
hyper specialization. Okay.
Yeah, but it's hyper specialization that sort of really ends up being more of a labor story, Like these industrial managers see that having 10,000 workers in one place might cause them to organize, and then they get scared. So there's like lots of stuff from the 50s and 60s about how the optimal plant size is somewhere between 500 and 2,000 people, because you're more able to cultivate this sort of big scare quotes here industrial family vibe.
Harder to make a like craft union if you don't think of yourself as an auto worker, because you think of yourself as like because
you're just closer to management. Yeah.
Sure.
And you got like that trend only gets worse until now, where it's like an industrial facility is 10 guys and 5 CNC machines.
Yeah, exactly. So it's lots of just layering. Lots of different things are coming in, not doing good things for the railroads here.
Another factor, end of the passenger service.
Yep.
And this is sort of one of the things which brings in, a lack of scheduled discipline, because you didn't have these scheduled passenger trains anymore, so you were running the freight trains a lot more willy nilly.
Yep.
And this is something that's this is something which is going to factor in later. But yeah, you have this contributes to our horrible scheduling system right now. Yep. Then of course we had this thing called deregulation in the 80s. And deregulation is essentially, what was the regulation? The main regulation was that railroad rates were set by the ICC. And the ICC had sort of an arbitrary view of what rates should be, right? Railroad rates were set by like the cost of the value of the goods being transported less than the cost of transportation, right? Which is a
sort
weird
of phase of the moon stuff.
Yes, it's sort of a weird system, and there were situations where the Interstate Commerce Commission would not let railroads lower rates, even if they economically could, because the ICC sort of had this vague idea they were going to run a balanced transportation system, but we're not going to intervene directly in any way. We're going to do it indirectly through rate regulation. And this is sort of a strange idea, considering there was massive federal investment in highways, in waterways, in airports, and basically nothing for rail. And just huge investments in the stupidest things possible, like the Tennessee Tombigbee Canal, right? And railroads didn't get anything. So this sort of contributes to this drive for, as Uday said, productivity. You get this whole concept of demarketing, where railroads are going to go out of their way to get rid of traffic they don't want. It also makes it, once they're deregulated, it makes it easier to trim or eliminate these branch lines. You can drive away customers. You can discipline labor this way as well, because it's like, we want to complain, we can just fire half of you tomorrow. We'll make more money. And then, of course, we lose the passenger service. We gain Amtrak. And Amtrak is just a weird system because it introduces this weird adversarial dispatching regime, right? Because it's not like we're going to, these Amtrak trains, you have to pay a fine if you delay them. But sometimes it's easier to just pay the fine. So this is another factor going on here. A big one in this era is we start developing Wyoming coal.
Yep.
Oh, fantastic. Yep. This, going to have no negative consequences for anyone.
None whatsoever.
Nope.
Yeah. So Uday mentioned this previously. The Burlington Northern runs this line out to coal fields in Wyoming. They make oodles and oodles of cash. All of a sudden, these big coal unit trains are very, very profitable. It's one of the several shots of adrenaline in the arm of the industry that happens after the 1940s. Like dieselization, like reduced crew sizes, so on and so forth, which are sort of keeping this whole system barely functioning.
Mm-hmm.
They got lucky is definitely an underrated argument for why railroads, turned around in the 80s, between the coal and then the rise of, international container traffic, which is essentially just like, bulk movements of a bunch of very easily stackable boxes from ports inland. It's, it's a lot of high density traffic that is very railroad friendly.
Highly recommend
they not
the
done
box,
this?
although I forget who that's by.
Mark Levinson.
Yep.
Had they not done this, had they not gotten lucky with like Wyoming coal, what would have happened? Would there just like not have been a credible American freight railroad outside of like a couple of areas, or what? Do you think that would have forced some kind of positive change out of it? Would we be on the good timeline?
Mixed bag, I think. There would have been a very sort of regionally sort of different. I think, Western railroads really had a good time of it in the 80s and 90s, in part because of all the coal traffic. Though, of course, coal traffic had its own problems for them. But
say that branch line probably single-handedly destroyed the American nuclear power industry.
Yep.
Yeah.
Jesus.
Yeah.
Can't have anything nice.
Exactly.
No, you have to look at this like 24-meter tall wall of like open cast coal. And just be like, there's like 100 gigatons of like carbon dioxide emissions alone in like what you can see here, and this is the reason why we can't have nice things.
Yes, that is modernity. But I think railroads would have survived. I think it would just be a very different looking system, probably less profitable on the whole.
You probably have a more credible case for nationalization earlier.
That's fair.
Yeah. Because if you look at the numbers, I mean, the big drivers of traffic gains between like 1980 2006 were coal, intermodal, so
Is it
containers and
still
trailers.
coal?
Oh yeah, no, coal grew like immensely from definitely from the 70s, but even from the 80s to 2006.
Yeah, coal looked like it was on its way out in the 60s. And
and then what happened was goddamn Powder River base.
Yeah. And also, I mean,
Wyoming ruins it for everyone.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, the unit train itself, you know, unit trains are essentially like, instead of having a train that carries like a bunch of different cars for a bunch of different customers, unit trains are, you know, one customer is going to fill like 110 cars of freight train with one commodity, you know, grain, coal, potash, whatever it is. And then we're going to ship it, you know, we're going to shuttle it back and forth between origin and destination. And because it's really simple to run, it's cheap to run and attractive. So railroads love unit trains, and large customers love them too. And unit trains were invented in the 1960s by coal railroads in the East Coast who were really scared of nuclear power plants, natural gas power plants, and then coal slurry pipelines. Like unit trains were their sort of managerial response to all that. And then of course they go west and like, well now it's really cheap to ship stuff from Wyoming to, you know, power plants further east. So what if we start doing that? And then Clean Air Act passes, and you know, now we have.
I really don't like the sound of like a coal slurry pipeline, though. I feel like you dodged a bullet.
You should go to West Virginia.
I think the last one in operation in the United States just shut down.
Did it?
Yes, is something in like coal slurry is when you grind the coal into powder, and then you mix it with water, and then you ship it down the pipeline, and then at the other end you dry it out, and then you put it through the power plant.
Yep.
Gross.
It's horrible. They also were scared of barges, I should add. There was a weird little recognized subplot of American transportation history where like the waterways system in the 50s and 60s got a lot of money. And like really actually grew quite a bit in that time. Then we stopped investing in it. Now like 70% of dams in the US are some way deficient.
Thank you, Bureau of Reclamation.
Yeah. Anyway.
So yeah, all these factors combined to make the railroads specialize more heavily on the most profitable traffic, which, you know, is bad for a lot of us. Very good for the operating ratio, though.
Yep.
Which
line go up.
Line goes up.
Line must go up.
Yeah.
And has.
Yeah.
So if you're just listening to this is how would we describe this graph?
Line go up.
So basically it's sort of the inverse of the operating ratio. So rather than being you know, like expenses over revenues, it is, I mean, it's 1 minus expenses over revenues.
1 minus expenses over revenues,
Yeah. Basically it is the percent difference between expenses and revenues. So the higher it is, the more money you're making per dollar of gross earnings. And it's going up. In 2005, it's around, a little bit below 20. And in 2021, it's above 40. So railroads are making a lot more profit per dollar of sort of, you know, basic revenue now than they were 15 years ago.
And these operating ratios were previously unheard of. And unless you were the Pittsburgh and Lake Erie.
Yeah. Or the Great Northern. I think they got their ratio like in like 47 or 46 at some point in the 1890s.
Wow.
Good for them.
Yeah. That's with steam locomotives too.
A W plus ratio.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's actually how sort of we all became so obsessed with train lengths. James J. Hill's whole thing was maximize the length of every single train leaving your terminals and then make money. And it worked like very well.
So if you just look at this, then the state of the American railroad is fantastic. It's only getting better.
Incredible.
Right,
yes.
Exactly.
Why would you strike when the line is going up? Why would you strike when things are
so
good?
well?
Yeah, because that's something that's going to be represented by this metric, right?
Absolutely.
Because this is the line. This is it. It's so important. This is the thing that we prioritize. It's got to reflect this.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, next slide.
Yes.
So the fun thing about operating ratios is that, you know, you can have a great operating ratio on like $1 of revenue, but it's still $1 revenue, and that's sort of the problem with railroads right now.
The ideal railroad is one that owns no track and runs no trains.
Exactly.
Listen, he might have half a pint of blood left, but his cholesterol level, fantastic.
Yes.
So this chart is it is so if you add sort of the total revenue of railroads and truckers together from 1990 to present, it is the share of that sort of two-way sum that railroads have. And guess what? As that line has been going up, especially since about 2010, the railroads' share of revenues has been going down, and that's in large part because despite the fact they're making a lot of money on the traffic they do have, part of how they're accomplishing that is by pushing away all the traffic that is profitable and they might want to carry, but is not sufficiently profitable enough to push their operating ratio up. So, like, let's say you want to ship paper from, I don't know, like Old Town, Maine to Scranton, Pennsylvania. Maybe the operating ratio of that particular shipment is like 70%. But if you the railroad want a operating ratio of 50, you're going to reject that traffic, even though it's profitable, because it's going to on net push your operating ratio upwards. So
and that doesn't disappear; it just goes to trucks.
Exactly.
Trucks, yeah.
Exactly. And so between that sort of demarketing pressure, and then structural factors like the decline of coal and changes in the way the intermodal market works, railroads have not been doing too hot lately. They've been losing like sort of market share and revenue share to truckers. So despite the fact that they're internally profitable and all the investors are like, oh, look at all this operating ratio performance, we're doing so well. Again, the metrics we have socially chosen to be representative of good railroad performance are belying the fact that the industry is shrinking, basically. And that's bad on a whole number of different fronts. Obviously, it's bad for the long run health of railroads. It's harder and harder to make lots of money and sort of be relevant and maintain your infrastructure if you're continuously losing traffic. It's also really bad for the environment. As whatever you might think about the Class 1 railroads, their emissions per sort of ton of freight are not an order of magnitude, but significantly smaller than trucks. And they, yeah. And I don't know, Justin, if you want to say more on this, but
the railroads, like, it's sort of a contradiction here, but the railroads are the most efficient way to environmentally friendly way to ship anything over land. That's despite the fact that they're all diesel. The three largest consumers of diesel fuel in the world are the U.S. Army, Union Pacific, and Burlington Northern Santa Fe. In that order, I believe. But it is much more environmentally friendly to ship by train than it is by truck. I think barges have them beat, but not by a huge amount. Shipping by plane is stupid. Air freight as a concept is really dumb. But this
makes sense for like some tiny percentage of things that need to be there extremely quickly.
Fresh cut flowers or whatever. Yeah,
or like
And fresh cut flowers are insanely dangerous to fly. It's one of the things they give off a shitload of like small dust and particulates that set off smoke alarms.
Fascinating. I didn't know that.
We love green elevator explosions, but at 30,000 feet.
Oh yeah.
Well, not even the fact that they start fires or like can explode, but the fact that it means that like you get a bunch of spurious fire alarms, which can lead you to like ignore a real one.
Even better.
They're like genuinely like a shitload of air freight is insanely dangerous because the industry tolerates a much higher risk to cargo pilots than to passengers.
Yeah,
I played Transport Fever too. I know that you can ship crude oil by plane profitably.
That's right. Yeah, it's definitely not. You're not flying some sort of like tri-jet that in passenger service would have been retired 25 years ago, which has every single possible warning light on in like a completely dark cockpit over the middle of the Atlantic.
My old Jeep Cherokee was like that. Yeah.
Your Jeep Cherokee was a tri-jet?
Yeah, dude, it was really weird. It was real weird. Like the only
intense engine swap.
Yeah. But I was gonna go LS, and then I thought, nah, not ridiculous enough.
In aggregate, shifting freight from train to truck is bad. I will note that this chart is revenue and not tonnage, which I think would show a similar trend. Because describing freight rail share of freight in revenue versus tonnage, these are two very different numbers because the railroads tend to handle a lot of stuff like gravel and coal and
Shit,
there's
no
sort
one
of
wants
like
to move by
crude oil
truck,
and stuff
right?
like that, you know.
10,000 ton aggregate train that has a net worth of like $5.
Exactly.
yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Yeah, but yeah, it's this sort of similar story with tonnage as well, or ton miles. If
Yes.
that's generally the one that people use. Yeah, you know,
Or it could be something
sort
like
of
trash that has a negative value.
Yeah.
So says you.
The takeaway from this is, as we've mentioned before, is that like steel wheels on steel rails with a very low rolling resistance is a very efficient way of moving heavy shit quickly.
Yeah.
Yes.
To the point that it actually offsets. You can use fucking bunker fuel in these things.
Yeah.
It would still be net gain.
Yeah, and you know, on from both a business perspective in these revenue charts, and then a tonnage perspective as well, railroads are just not doing too hot, despite what the operating ratio says. This chart I'll only speak about briefly, but basically the point here is that, you know, on the left you have, you know, a large bar that is the amount of traffic railroads handled in 1980, and then on the right it's a large bar that's 2019, and they're really not that different. You know, despite all of, you know, this is using sort of carloads and intermodal units as its units. So, you know, there actually has been more traffic growth than is represented here, because the length that trains move goods is just longer than it used to be, for, I mean, a variety of reasons, some of which railroads cause, some of which are just structural factors in the freight market. But basically, railroads have lost traffic in essentially every carload category and have gained traffic through intermodal. So that's, you know, containers and trailers on trains. And I think, you know, this is relevant, you know, both because, you know, intermodal is the way that, you know, trains contact Amazon, or, you know, access like the Amazon packages and, you know, the widgets and stuff we're, you know, sending across the globe to each other these days. But also because it is like intermodal is kind of like efficiency minded railroad par excellence. Like, instead of having to ever, you know, deal with, you know, local freight switching or, you know, the complexities of, you know, moving trains around, you know, terminal areas, you instead just have trucks do all that. And, you know, the trains, you know, gather all the containers and trailers at major terminals, and then they haul them for a few thousand miles and dump them somewhere else.
It's perfect standardization. It's a box.
Exactly.
You know, you don't think too much about what's in there.
Exactly. Right. And it, you know, and like, to their credit, like this is something that does on some level play to the strengths of each mode, right? You know, trucks have flexibility and railroads are really good at scale economies, and like that does make sense. That said, I think, you know, things like the Chicago example earlier that we discussed sort of speak to the fact that, you know, even if you're running an intermodal network, you know, there are going to be situations where you might want to be able to be good at handling complexity. And
you have, I think a good, maybe a good example here. There's some perverse economies that come out of this. Like, so in Boston, there was CSX had an intermodal terminal that was relatively close to downtown Boston. And they decided, you know, rather than ship all these containers into Boston and then have these relatively short truck runs, they would consolidate everything in a bigger facility in Worcester, Mass.
Yep.
And
Worcester,
you know,
Mass.
Yeah. So now,
nemesis of the podcast.
All of the
we don't
containers
care that
bound.
you the WPI. Shut the hell up.
all of the containers bound for Boston, rather than coming in really close on a train, they all get unloaded in Worcester, and then they and then they're trucked, you know, 60 miles on the Mass Turnpike, and that's, you know, a massive increase in vehicle miles traveled. It's bad for emissions. You know, it's bad for traffic. But, you know, it's good for the railroad operating ratio. So,
yeah, it also, of course, meant that they could do a huge land deal and sell all that land.
This is true.
It does remind me of that, like, peaches packed in Argentina, like peaches from packed in Argentina or whatever.
And someone's going to point out, you know, the net carbon emission, blah, blah, blah. Okay, fine, whatever. But in this case, it's very real concrete effects, you know, and the economics look great. And then from a lot of other perspectives, it's like, you did what?
Why are you like this? Yes.
And, you know, it's in Boston, like, especially, like, there's, you know, there has been a real trend of like decentralizing industry away from the core. You know, like, there are now a lot more distribution warehouses out by Route 128 or Route 495. And like, part of what that change in terminal location reflected was exactly that. But, you know, these things have a momentum to them, right? As you start moving more and more freight infrastructure away from the urban core, you know, you're only going to get more and more warehousing relocation away from the core, which means that, now instead of your, delivery truck or whatever traveling from, somewhere relatively near, the population in Boston itself, it's now going to be driving, however many miles on the pike, which is, bad. So, and it's a problem everywhere. There's the whole universe of literature on like logistics sprawl or freight sprawl or whatever you want to call it. And it's hard because on the one hand, like, having a big truck terminal next to one's home is like just objectively bad. Like that's a huge emissions source, and it, drives asthma and cancer rates up through the roof. It's a disaster. But on the other hand, having all those trucks instead go by people's homes who live along highways is also bad. So there's a sort of, and this is a broader theme in American freight policy, where there's sort of like, these are all like problems that are systemic, right? And they involve the lives and livelihoods of all sorts of different companies and people and actors, and we don't treat them like that right now. We just sort of do policymaking piecemeal, and that sucks.
Right. We don't look at anything inclusive. We just don't look at anything. It's like the problem stops here, and and nothing affects anything.
Exactly.
Well, you have this wonderful environmental impact process mandated by the EPA, which seems to only be able to reach bad decisions.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. It's a mess. It's a mess. Yeah. I don't want to dwell on this slide for too long.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm gonna
absolutely do not dwell.
I think
how's that tummy, Alice?
Bad. I'm just gonna like, whenever it gets bad next, I'm not gonna mute the mic. You can experience it for yourself. It'll be a little treat for you guys.
Thank you, Alice.
Your focus on your operating ratio at the expense of gaining traffic has had real concrete effects for let's say in this case the American taxpayer, right?
Sure. Those idiots.
I know, right? Yeah.
Fuck them.
Okay, so this is a trash train, the city of Roanoke, Virginia.
It's kind of rude to call it that. I mean, look, it's not in the best shape, but
it carries trash.
Well, I mean, don't we?
I wish they could have made it like a little prettier. Like the green, the dumpster green is unappealing.
It's a rolling dumpster. Yeah, it's a rolling dumpster
still.
So back in the 90s,
convergence of function and form.
Yeah.
Back in the 90s, the city of Roanoke wanted to get a bunch of municipal waste trucks off of I-81, which was quickly crowding up, right? And they decided, okay, we'll talk to Norfolk Southern, which is the railroad that built that town. Well, the Norfolk and Western did, not the Norfolk
And then
Southern.
what'd they do to it, Roz?
Oh, boy. That's been cast off. Yeah, they left that whole abandoned skyscraper downtown, and they shut down the locomotive repair shops too.
Yep.
Wow.
But they also did this very recently. So the city built a new rail line to get to the city dump. They built a new facility near downtown, which is a waste transloading facility. So the garbage trucks pull in, they dump everything in the railroad cars, and they go out and go grab more garbage. They built the world's largest rotary dumper. That's the thing.
Beautifully seductive sentence.
Yeah, I'm pretty thick, bro.
That's where they tip the entire railroad car upside down in order to unload it.
It's so cool that you can do that. Is Liam about?
You okay? What happened?
This is where the home intruder segment.
I'll be right back. I'll be right back. You
sound of pistol being loaded.
Yeah, you guys continue without me for a hot minute.
Hi, it's Justin. So this is a commercial for the podcast that you're already listening to. People are annoyed by these, so let me get to the point. We have this thing called Patreon, right? The deal is you give us $2 a month, and we give you an extra episode once a month. Sometimes it's a little inconsistent, but it's $2. You get what you pay for. It also gets you our full back catalog of bonus episodes so you can learn about exciting topics like guns, pickup trucks, or pickup trucks with guns on them. The money we raise through Patreon goes to making sure that the only ad you hear on this podcast is this one. Anyway, that's something to consider if you have $2 to spare each month. Join at patreon.com/WTYP pod. Do it if you want. Or don't. It's your decision, and we respect that. Back to the show.
Yeah. So anyway, they built this entire very expensive facility to get these trucks off the road and worked great for about 30 years. You go to the train would pick up the trash. It would go 20 miles to the dump. They'd unload it. It would come back, right? Another 20 miles. And they did this, I want to say once, maybe twice a day. But the thing is, you're tying up a whole rail crew for the day for a 40-mile round trip. And that's that is not a great operating ratio compared to a longer haul, right?
Yeah, they're merely providing an essential service to an entire city.
Yeah, you're making 20% rather than 40 or whatever, Exactly.
So in 2020, Norfolk Southern stiffed the city because the margin on the train was too low to maintain those sweet operating ratios. So this brand new branch line and this whole facility were just stranded assets now because the only connection was with Norfolk Southern. They couldn't get a short line to operate it or something because short lines like these sorts of things because they don't have operating ratio constraints. And they wound up having to pave over the new branch line and run everything on trucks.
Yeah. It's just, yeah.
Does castle doctrine mean anything to you?
Liam, how does it feel to have taken a human life?
Pretty good.
And these sorts of
things. What do you feel when you kill women and children? Recall.
Yeah. We've all seen it.
So
still makes Ross laugh. That's all I need.
This sort of thing hurts everyone except investors. And these sorts of strategies are how railroads were able to plow, about $180 billion or so into dividends and stock buybacks over the last decade.
Is that a 180 billion with a B?
Yep.
Yes.
Fuck my butt.
So this has been a great time to be a railroad investor.
Oh yeah.
Yes, it's been incredible. And all this money that goes into increasing, inflating the stock value and to investors, that if you were like, I want to build high-speed rail from New York City to Los Angeles, $180 billion is the sort of figure you'd be looking at.
Yeah.
This is a crazy amount of money. And there's so little infrastructure investment to show for it because it was stocks.
is that
different kinds of lines?
Stocks.
A different, more profound kind of line must be cited.
Yes. No rail lines, only number lines.
Exactly.
Yes. Yeah.
Managerialism.
Yes.
No catch, only throw.
Yeah. Okay. Schedules.
Schedules.
So I think sort of the reason this schedule is up on the screen is because the sort of central animating catchphrase of railroading in the past few years in the United States has been precision scheduled railroading.
Guess I know your thoughts on our New Day bill. Pay no attention to the man who knows much more than me. Simply boo him.
I agree. So PSR, which is what people call precision scheduled railroading, acronym. It is sort of one of these somewhat amorphous concepts, and that there is one vision of it, but then it's kind of also like it's a set of words that's thrown around, and kind of ends up meaning kind of whatever depending on who's saying it. But basically,
it's doctrine, and we love a doctrine.
Yeah,
we do love a doctrine.
In a few slides, we'll give a much more sort of operational description of what it is and it's not. But at sort of the highest level, it's sort of an operating philosophy that asks railroad management to be much more, let's say, intentional about how they use their assets and how they plan their trains and how they sort of use and how they structure crew assignments and whatever in running the railroad to sort of improve productivity and also, at least theoretically, improve service to customers. Essentially by making, and here's where the sort of the scheduled part comes in, by sort of making regular, consistently delivered operating plans rather than having everything run ad hoc, you will, be able to both save money and improve service. That's sort of the idea in a nutshell. But really, precision scheduled railroading is nowhere near as sort of new or revolutionary or anything as anyone might want you to believe. American railroads have for, well over a century now, been sort of struggling with what it means to actually run a railroad and have a schedule. And I think both for understanding how sort of the, productivity managerialism and traffic losses and infrastructure changes that we talked about in previous slides played out, and also for understanding what PSR's sort of, intervention is. I think it's very important to understand how that's all played out. So, way back in the beginning, like we're talking 1840s, 1850s, railroads didn't have telegraphs or signals. So the way that trains were stopped from colliding with each other was by schedules. Your schedules would tell you where you would meet other trains. They would tell you where you were going to, drop people or freight cars off. They were sort of the managerial fabric of railroading. But then, we got signals, we got telegraphs, we got sort of equipment that allowed managers to intervene and supervise their railroad in, nearly real time. And we started to move away from schedules. There became things called extra freights and freight trains that essentially had no schedule, and we became more accepting of delays. And railroading sort of incrementally lost its structure. Now, that sort of varied back and forth with time. I think one particularly interesting example of scheduling having a sort of a moment in the sun in sort of an industry that was overall trending towards more use of like extra freight trains and sort of flexible, unscheduled operations is this schedule I have on the screen here. So this is from the Buffalo, Rochester, and Pittsburgh Railroad, which became part of the B&O and then became the Buffalo and Pittsburgh Railroad, or a lot of it ended up becoming the Buffalo and Pittsburgh today, which runs in western Pennsylvania and western New York. And essentially what this is it is a timetable that's not assigned to trains. So these are times that, freight trains, really mostly full of coal, would be released from various stations. And they're written to sort of minimize what they call avoidable delays. So, if your 1:15 a.m. departure from Lincoln Park, which is on the left in the second row here, is its timetable to meet all the other trains in the other direction that it will
it's going
meet.
to somewhere called Tied Up Station, which I think I've been there, and then to which sort of next stop, and then to Farmersville. So they had mobile games even then.
Yeah. But anyway, so the idea here is that, even if you're not assigning these train slots and these train paths to individual trains, you're at least, running trains at times that will mean they meet trains the opposite direction with sort of a minimum of delay.
So these are the times you can release trains.
Basically, yeah.
And then you're not gonna fuck everything up.
Exactly.
You will fuck things up if you release them any other time.
Exactly. They call these pegs. We now call them paths. Anyway, so
tied up and pegged, huh?
We should all be so lucky.
But yeah, so throughout the sort of teens and 20s, when railroads were really busy, they played around a lot with schemes like this to essentially, even with a more sort of contingent, flexible, whatever you want to call it, operating model, to still have sort of schedules and regularity and importantly, infrastructure that was optimized for the schedule. So like there is one example from the Missouri Pacific where they did a very complex exercise, sort of like this one, where they, tried to figure out when to release trains from major terminals. And then what they did after that was they're like, okay, so we know what times to release trains from these terminals. Now let's go along our lines and figure out how to improve our infrastructure to, make this even better.
It's sort of the nightmare situation of like the exam question of a train is leaving Cincinnati at
Exactly, yeah.
12 a.m.
Yes.
Doing that with like 100 more variables, like professional.
Exactly. There's a horrifyingly complicated chart that I almost put on this slide, but decided not to. That's from the Missouri Pacific exercise, and like, I don't know, even I can't really make sense of it. And
It sounds like
I
a
spent
military exercise. Like it's it's one of those
yeah,
whatever
exercises are seldom this well planned. I think
one of the whatever the one where we were going to fight Iran was, and Iran won.
We're playing well.
Challenge.
Millennium Challenge, yeah.
2000. I don't remember what year it was.
Yeah.
2002, maybe.
Yeah.
Turns out speedboats are not your friends if you're a naval destroyer.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, point being, so these schemes are really popular in the 20s, but then in the 30s the Depression happens, in the 40s World War II, but then throughout the 50s and 60s railroads begin to lose traffic, and when you combine traffic losses with a fascination with train length and sort of product and sort of really cost reduction, you end up with networks where trains aren't really that scheduled. So actually, let me back up one step here. So there's scheduling on sort of the line level like this, but there's also a different sort of scheduling that exists in railroading that's, I think, really important. I think it's worth understanding as sort of a separate category to this. So historically, like way back in the 1880s or whatever, the way people ran freight trains was very just sort of decentralized. Freight cars would show up at yard A, and the yard master would be like, these 50 cars are all going in roughly the same direction, and these 50 cars are all going roughly in the same direction. There you go, 2 trains, and we're going to send them along to the next yard in that direction, and then it's the next yard.
We have a bunch of guys,
yeah,
all playing a little puzzle game. This is fun.
Yeah, and they don't really talk to each other.
I'd use, but
yeah,
good.
No, of course not. They all hate each other. They're all like in sort of an inter-Nissan series.
No, exactly. No, quite honestly, they did. Like oftentimes
That's
yard masters would be like,
proper.
I don't want these cars on my hands. I'm just going to send them along to the next yard, and that's someone else's problem now.
Yeah, exactly. Those bastards in Harrisburg sent 50 cars this way.
Yeah,
I'll show them.
Exactly.
Dream job. Absolute dream job.
Exactly, yeah. So, and there were some exceptions to this. Like, if you got one of those like time freights for livestock or whatever, obviously your cars are going to be handled in a much more sort of direct and controlled fashion. But for whatever,
had this entire arcane system of freight forwarders and things like that.
Yep. Yeah, it's all a mess. Anyway, but as one of the outcomes of the whole USRA, like federally led statistical reform efforts that I described earlier, and also just the general interest in like scientific management and like process control that comes out of sort of managerial progressivism in the 1910s and 1920s, as people start to think, what if instead of doing this crazy chaotic decentralized thing, we instead actually planned how cars should move throughout our network?
That sounds like communism to me.
Central planning. I know, crazy, right?
I don't like it.
So railroads in the 1920s and really mostly in the 1920s begin doing these very detailed traffic studies where they look at all the freight moving through their networks, and then they start to plan like, okay, so this freight train here, it's going to take cars for these 4 different destinations, and it's going to drop the first 2 blocks of cars here, and then it's going to take some more cars, and basically structuring and sort of controlling the flow of cars across the entire network, so that instead of handling a car like 25 times across its trip, cars are sorted in one place, and then they're taken as far as possible and then sorted again. And that means that cars move through the system much faster because you're sorting them a lot less often, and trains flow better because there's actually a plan that sort of knits the entire function of the network into a network rather than a bunch of
individual
sort of like, I hate you, here's 50 cars relationships.
Beautiful.
So
50 cars full of
trains car poop.
50 cars are the most foul smelling thing you can think of.
Exactly. Like moldy lettuce or something.
Yes.
Actually, probably wouldn't smell that bad. Moldy beef. There you go.
Yes.
Oh, thanks, Uday. Thanks, Uday.
All the ice melted in the refrigerator cars.
Yeah. So you end up with system classification planning in the 1920s, and everyone's into it, and it's like, oh my god, this is so great. where cars are moving like 4 times faster than they used to because they're not being sorted every 100 miles, and our trains are moving better, and everything's more productive, and service is better. And those things were all true. But then again, so the sort of line level scheduling and then this sort of network scheduling, they both end up colliding with our good old friend, the operating ratio, and then the truck. So as railroads lose traffic and sort of fall back increasingly on these strategies that emphasize sort of productivity improvement as like one of, if not the key sort of response to declining profits, these schedules and these network plans begin to come apart because, it might not be that every single day of the week, Wichita, Kansas is going to have enough cars to justify, a train that has traffic for like Chicago and I don't know, Peoria or whatever. So on those days, yard masters and local supervision on these railroads are going to be incentivized to, look good for their managers above them by, okay, so instead of running this train, we're going to combine these 2 trains into one and run them at a different time. And, we'll sort it out down the road what's going to happen. So you end up moving back away from
it's
these.
Still the next guy's problem.
Exactly. So you end up in this weird liminal sort of limbo space where, you have at least these theoretical sort of network schedules that show how cars are supposed to, move between trains and make connections and, work nicely. But then in reality, what you have is a bunch of people whose, salaries depend on them reducing costs, combining and canceling and rerouting trains willy-nilly to, like essentially maximize train length and make sure you're getting as much as possible out of every single crew, rather than trying to think of this from like a network service perspective. And well, that's bad. And it only gets worse in the 60s and 70s, where you have this whole new thing that happens with unit trains. So, all the trains I just described are trains that are generally carrying cars for many different customers. But when, as railroads get more desperate and as capacity becomes more, there's just so much excess capacity around, they start trying things like literally like called rent a train. So if you're a big customer,
I like it. Roz, you're up.
Yes. I would like to rent a train, please.
Yeah, exactly. So let's say
I get
Roz,
to drive it?
Maybe. But you can put your locomotives on it. So like you have utilities and big grain shippers. They'll come to railroads and they'll literally be like, okay, here we want this. We're gonna rent a few train sets from you, and we're just gonna kind of send them wherever we want to, whenever we want to do so. And railroads, because they're they have so much infrastructure relative to the traffic they have, they're kind of just like, okay, sure, we'll take what we can get. And so on top of this sort of increasingly chaotic scheduled environment, you also now have all these trains that are essentially running randomly across your system, sort of whenever their shippers desire. And
yeah, we took one of the advantages of trucking, that it's like atomic and molecular, and we just applied that to trains.
No, exactly.
It's 1-to-1, baby. Shut up.
Yeah, and I mean, and to be fair, like in some cases, it absolutely does make a huge difference, and it works, and it helps railroads stay competitive.
But it worked really good on a Reading.
Yeah. They did on a very micro scale.
Yes.
And like I think obviously, however annoying the unit train's consequences might be, they were an incredibly important development to sort of help sustain railroading through this era. Anyway, though, end product of this is, by like 1985, you end up in a railroad network where you have a bunch of, you have a few priority trains that really do run schedules, and then you have a ton of these mixed freight trains that sort of run like schedules with some scarecoats around them. And then you have all these unit trains, coal, grain, I don't know, soda ash, whatever else you want to sort of ship in bulk over long distances, that are running essentially ad hoc. And that creates a very, very chaotic and complicated environment for operations. And into this sort of funhouse steps Hunter Harrison, which is our next slide.
Yes. I did want to note a fun railroad naming convention here.
Yeah.
Northward and southward. Because they don't use northbound and southbound in railroading. Northward means north to a specific point. Southward is south to a specific point, but it does not necessarily have to actually be south or north. Sometimes southward is a train going north and vice versa.
Yep.
Anyway, that's a fun fact.
Always a good time. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Hunter Harrison time.
Yeah. I guess should I just start this one and then we can.
Yes, that sounds like a good idea.
All right. So Hunter Harrison he got his start on Frisco, I think. He worked his way all the way up from really the bottom of the ranks on the railroad.
The railroad that was named for a city it didn't reach.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Also was famous for having given the Burlington Northern a particularly anti-schedule management. And a management that also did a bunch of really, really, in retrospect at least, dumb line abandonments. But yeah, again, a different podcast. Anyway, so Hunter Harrison, the story, I don't know if it's apocryphal or not, but the story that he always told in interviews was, he was some like junior yard master in, I don't know, Tennessee or somewhere in the sort of south or southeast. And his boss asked him, they were standing in the tower that overlooked the yard, whatever yard this was. And his boss asked him, Hunter, what do you see out there? And Hunter replies, that I see good business. And his boss is like, no, I see a bunch of traffic that's not moving.
Some kind of old wizened railroading Gandalf.
Exactly.
Yeah, you thought I was being metaphorical, and I wasn't. Fuck you. Move the trains.
Yeah, I know, exactly. Because if you're running like a chaotic operation with like a bad schedule plan, one of the outcomes of that is that your cars are going to spend a lot of time sitting in freight yards waiting for their planned freight train out. And that, it gets to the point, this has always been a problem with railroading and continues to be a problem with railroading, but cars in sort of mixed freight service spend about 60% of their lives in freight yards doing nothing. They spend maybe 10% of their lives actually moving on freight trains, and the remainder is spent at sitting at customers' sidings being loaded or unloaded. So really, if anyone ever asks you, and if you ever want to sound smart when talking to someone who thinks they know a bit about freight railroading, and they're like, oh, well, if we ran the trains 90 miles per hour, that'd be so great. You reply, no. It doesn't matter if you run them 90. Really, what you need to do is get them out of the yards faster. Because at the end of the day, freight railroading is it's not really a game of run the trains faster between points. It is get the stuff out of the origins and destinations.
Right.
Exactly, yeah. So PSR sort of is an operating philosophy that's organized around, at least in its original conception, around what if we didn't do this thing where we had cars sitting in yards every 200 miles for days on end. Its sort of commitment is, okay, so we have these unit trains, we have these mixed freight trains, and we have all these freight yards. Let's try to figure out how to absolutely minimize the number of times that freight yards or freight cars end up sitting in yards along the way, maximize sort of the velocity of shipments across the system. And let's do that by creating a network plan that we're actually going to execute every single day rather than modifying it by the whims of whoever. That's actually, on paper, it's a great idea. And maybe we should go for the next slide here, and we can I made a bunch of very quick diagrams to sort of describe the process. So this is sort of how railroading worked, and to some degree still works. And I don't know, let's say 1990. So you have, the trains at the top and the bottom, the ones that are all red and all white. They're unit trains, right? They're carrying, they're all freight for. Let's imagine they're both coal trains, and one is all that coal is going to the red dot, and on the other one, all that coal is going to the white dot. And that's, and they run, let's say about once a day on some random schedule. And, the utilities are happy, and it's fun and games, and it's nice. And then you have these mixed freight trains, the two in the middle, and they're carrying freight for a whole bunch of different places. Some is going to the red dot, some is going to the white dot, and then some are going to the blue and the green dots. And you can give these places names if you want in your head to make this simpler. And what those mixed freight trains do is, while the unit trains just run directly to the destination and then, cycle back, the mixed freight trains run to a yard right there that you see. And the cars are broken apart and are sorted.
Yeah, by one very angry guy.
Exactly.
One.
By some angry yardmaster who just yearns for the days when he could just make this someone else's problem.
Really, really wants to send 25 cars of sewage to Blue because he hates the guy
there. Exactly.
Fuck that dude.
So what he does is he takes, and these the mixed freight trains that are starting out from the left here, let's say they both run once a day. So the guy in the yard is gonna and I'm sorry for people who are listening to this on without slides, because I guess this might be kind of hard to understand. But he'll make one freight train at that yard that runs, let's say, every other day, and that goes to the red dot. So he can, maximize the length. So, some of those red freight cars end up spending like 2 days in the yard waiting for their train out. Then he, takes the blue and the green cars and puts them on the same train and then sends them to the blue and the green points. And that runs once a day because, it's 3 cars. So that's long enough by his standard. And then he runs a freight train to the white dot. And that runs, it's, you wouldn't have enough cars every single day. So maybe you run that, I don't know, 4 or 5 times a week. So again, you end up with some cars sitting in the yard for a day or two. So what you have here is a bit of a mess. So you have some freight trains which are just going directly, and it's all nice and pretty and back and forth. Then you have some freight trains where the shipments might take, 3 days to arrive. They might take 5 days to arrive. The yard gets congested. The freight cars are sitting there, costing money to exist, and the goods are losing value inside them or rotting or whatever. And it's just not great.
A whole train full of potatoes.
Exactly. It's they're all getting lost in a yard. We're going to imagine this is Selkirk for a second.
I believe there was a recent incident where, once again, the railroads lost a whole crop of potatoes. It was like a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, I heard about that. Yeah. Anyway, so you have, these like...
Time is a flat circle.
Yeah, exactly. Nothing ever changes. So you have this sort of messy operating model, but, it's sort of, to some people, looks nice. And it, I guess, works well enough. Because the trains are long, and in the end of the day, all these crews are still pulling 3 cars at a time. Obviously, in real life, we're talking more of like 100 cars at a time, but I can't fit 100 little boxes on my screen, so too bad. Your productivity numbers still look good, and I'm sure there's some guy at the yard who's like computing the number of cars switched per like yard engine hour, and that figure looks good too because you're sorting all this traffic in the yard. What PSR does is it throws this all out in the trash and combines everything and remixes it to make it better, at least in theory. So let's go to the next slide. So rather than having all those trains, all those cars getting sorted in that intermediate yard, what PSR will do instead is like, okay, let's make these trains a little longer. And instead of running all those trains to the intermediate yard, we're going to have, the unit train is going to run on a consistent daily schedule. And it's going to take that sort of red car that used to sort of have to suffer like every other day service from the yard to the red dot. And it's just going to, that car every single day is going to be taken to the destination. And that's great because now those shippers have more frequent service. And then for the blue and the green, they're going to get added to the cars going to the white dot. So rather than having those wait and have to, endure sorting at the yard, they're going to be combined with all the goods headed to the white point, and then we'll be dropped off along the way, and it's going to be all sort of nice and good, and that's great.
And we can fire the yardmaster.
Exactly. The yard goes bye-bye. Yeah.
You can the yard goes away, and then
saves weight.
Yeah. And
there's
we can pave over all of the rails. We can sell that off, and because railroads hate operating railroads.
Yes, the New York Central approach to restructuring.
There'd be fewer yard masters, and then have more intense hatred for each other.
Exactly. Yeah. And honestly, like
the conditions in which are needed to thrive.
But you're losing a yard, but this actually would, if this actually were how PSR worked in practice, this would actually be pretty good. Now there's 2 daily regular trains between, the starting point and the white dots here. The cars that are moving to the green and the blue dots are, moving faster because they're not being sorted in the middle. The cars going to the red dot are getting more consistent service. Like people, like in theory, PSR means that everybody kind of wins. You're saving money, but you're also delivering better service for your customers through sort of an integrated, more cohesive and more regularly delivered operating plan. However,
you get more traffic, which means you would need to run more trains, which means you hire more people, right?
Yeah.
You're getting more productivity out of those people.
Stack upon itself.
You also have better schedules, so you're not ruining those people's lives.
Exactly. The initial implementation of PSR on the Illinois Central actually came alongside an effort to give crews regular schedules. So, and in fact, one of the sort of children of that original PSR implementation, the Florida East Coast, to this day, I believe, still actually has a lot of its crews on regular schedules. So there really actually is precedent here for PSR or PSR-like concepts actually doing good for a lot of people involved. Problem is that's not really what PSR has been in practice, right? So that brings us to the next slide. So, if you're a railroad and you have this opportunity to completely restructure your entire operating plan, but you do that while, just being obsessed with, making that operating ratio line go up and making those train lengths even longer, you're not going to do what was on the previous slide where everybody wins. You're going to do this instead, which is combine all the traffic into just really incredibly long trains that run as or less frequently than the ones that preceded them. So in this example, instead of having, that nice daily freight train between the origin and the red dot, now we have like a 3 times weekly freight train that's like a bajillion feet long that carries everything for the red dot. Everyone's unhappy except for the productivity metrics. And then same deal with the blue and the green, right? Instead of having that nice sort of twice daily departure that, makes shippers happy and sort of moves the freight along nicely, you just put that all on one daily train that's like 15,000 feet long, and people just have to deal with it. That sucks on many levels, and I know, Justin, you want to jump in here on the suckiness?
Oh yeah, I mean the trains they're long, they're slow, they have more problems. I mean, it's a bad way to run a railroad. I got a demonstration, but that's a few slides up.
Yeah. What is the next slide? Actually, I've lost track.
The next slide is the yard.
Oh, excellent. Oh, yeah. So this is my favorite example. So, to this point of it being a mess, one of the things that you hear a lot when talking to people who, want to do like, better planning for like commuter railroads, for example, if you want to do rail planning well, you're really interested in making your sort of infrastructure and what you plan to do with the infrastructure match each other as close as possible. So, on a commuter railroad, like let's say you want to run, trains every 15 minutes, like SEPTA wants to right now. You'll build passing sidings in places that will allow trains running every 15 minutes to pass each other, and you're gonna design stations that facilitate that, and you're gonna, put flyovers at junctions that'll allow you to do that. So you're gonna design again infrastructure that matches your operating plan. Now, one of the big problems with PSR, or sort of evil PSR as it's being implemented today, is that
because good PSR was like a holistic idea, so of course you would do this as part of it. Whereas evil PSR, it seems, was what if we got rid of the sort of like petty yard fiefdoms and instead replaced them with nothing?
Exactly.
Yeah, well, you replace the petty fiefdoms with great powers.
Yeah, exactly. and sort
Holy
of
Roman Empire Railroad once again.
We have united all the warring kingdoms into one kingdom called Germany, and nothing bad will happen from that.
That's right. Yeah.
There are no more yards. There is just one long freight train.
I always thought that was someone described a while back. I forget who it was. Like, what if Amtrak adopted PSR and ran one long Northeast Regional in the morning each way?
Yeah, Snowpiercer.
It's like those elevators at Paternoster, right? You just get on one car, wait for it to get to the platform, get off, and the train's just still going the whole time, like Snowpiercer.
I'm just imagining
one 90-car train.
The boarding process in Boston. You could probably get on at Back Bay or Boston South Station at the same time. Like it sort of platforms at both stations at once. That would be glorious. But anyway, so the thing with PSR these days is, because it's being implemented really as a way of advancing the sort of the long-standing fascination railroads have had with operating ratios and train lengths and just productivity improvement, rather than being sort of like, okay, let's really properly do scheduling. Because of that, it's often being sort of, railroads are often establishing train lengths and operating patterns that are wildly sort of mismatched with what the actual capacities of their infrastructure are. So one example, and it's the one we have on the screen, is Englewood Yard in Houston, Texas. it's an incredibly busy facility. It handles a ton of chemical and just general freight traffic across the Gulf Coast, and serves all the refineries. And it's a Union Pacific yard. The tracks where they sort of build and break down trains in this yard are about 7,000 or 8,000 feet long, I believe. And of course, Union Pacific has decided that, in pursuit of their new PSR operating plan, they're instead going to run 14,000, 15,000, 16,000 foot trains into those tracks.
And just block a shitload of sidings with one train.
Exactly. So now what you have is in this incredibly congested terminal area, a bunch of trains doing all these back and forth moves to break themselves down into chunks that can actually literally fit in the yard.
And they're not going to expand the yard, of course, because that's impossible to do. You can't.
I think they're talking about it, but this is one of those things that has very self-evidently should have been done before you started running these gigantic trains, especially given how congested Houston is as a terminal. I believe the only flyover in the entire Houston terminal region, for trains at least, is actually in this photo. It's Houston. Houston is a mess, and a fascinating mess, but a mess nonetheless. So what you get is at yards like Englewood and across all these main lines that have 8,000 foot sidings for 14,000 foot trains, you just have chaos and variability, and sort of the ideal of the scheduled railroad becomes this gloopy, unreliable mess that might look good on an investor presentation because your productivity metrics are looking good, but in reality, precision scheduled railroading as implemented in the U.S. has just made railroading very fragile, and has taken a lot of the potential benefits, a lot of the upsides for everyone that might come with this model, and just made them into an exercise in sort of missed opportunities. Yeah,
it's very easy for corporate governance because you can go to shareholders and say, we're running 10 or 14,000 foot trains as opposed to last year when it was 8,000 feet.
Exactly.
That's productivity. Yes. This line is going up.
Exactly.
And if you want to explain why that's a stupid idea, it's going to take you 2 hours and 11 minutes.
Exactly.
Which none of these guys are going to take the time to learn what is even a stupid question to ask. Because it's making them money. Why would they do that? They have no incentive to.
And again, it's one of these things where it's not only just that they're not learning it, but everybody in the industry has been conditioned to think this way. We've been using the reason I read that quote from the Railway Age in 1901 is this problem has been around for really as long as railroads have existed.
For railroading, right.
We're talking about turning an incredibly sort of heavy ship and making it do a 180. This has these sort of ingrained ways of thinking about railroading and about transportation and about productivity it takes a lot of effort to shift that. And that's
also led to other weird problems. If everyone remembers, over the summer there was that thing about theft from trains in Los Angeles.
Oh yes.
the
dumbest YouTube comment we've ever gotten.
I think so. That was definitely one of the dumber ones. These trains pull into these yards and they're so big, the ass end of the train is outside of the secure yard area. So of course people are going to come and steal shit from it, right? And this is you can't police your way out of the situation. It's a fact that freight at rest is freight at risk. And the only way you can solve that problem is for the whole train to fit in the yard.
Yeah. So it's you end up with this really this mess, and again it's frustrating because it's a mess that's both a very sort of particular one to 2017 through present, but it's also one whose roots really lie in the 1850s, right? So it's one of those sort of wicked problems that you need sort of radically new policy and sort of discursive strategies to take apart and make better, which I guess we're going to get to in a minute. But anyway, enough about Englewood Yard and long freight trains.
What if we put the walls of the yard on a sort of extending rail, and then the yard
just the one pen library that's basically on rails.
Yeah, and the
yard's yard.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. We have an example next, right? Oh yeah, excellent.
I have a demonstration.
Excellent.
All right. Let's say I have 3 carloads of steel. I'm shipping from Birmingham, Alabama
Ooh, Mr. Richman, Mr. Podcaster.
Yes,
you know,
Mr.
you get a
Steel
couple
Baron.
of Patreons, and all of a sudden you're buying carloads of steel.
Yes,
Yeah.
I'm shipping them to Philadelphia, where I'm going to use them to build an extension to my podcasting palace. Right?
You got to talk to Miss Venus about that, bud.
I was about to say, yeah. So, the old way you do that is like you have a local train in Birmingham. It picks it up from the steel mill, right? Brings them to the yard in Birmingham. That's on day 1. On day 2, the cars are sorted. Day 3, the train brings them to either Chattanooga or Knoxville. I think Chattanooga in this situation.
You don't know in your own made-up scenario?
No, because
Depends which one of the sort of capricious princes of Chattanooga or Knoxville that you get.
Yeah, exactly. It depends on who is the yard master on duty today.
If you're on NS, I assume it'd be Chattanooga.
I think it'd be Chattanooga too. I think in reality, I looked this up after I wrote this a while back. I think in reality, the shipment would go by way of Atlanta, but I'm more familiar with this route. So day 4, the cars are sorted again onto another train, and that's going to bring it up to Roanoke, right? At day 6, they are going to be sorted into another train that's going to bring them to the yard in Harrisburg, Enola, right? They're going to be sorted on day 8. They're going to go to Philadelphia on day 9. On day 10, the local train that drops it off on my siding, right? So this is over a week to go 900 miles. This is not a great average speed. And in fact, classifying cars in yards sometimes takes longer than a day. Sometimes it takes multiple days. Yeah. But
and as we saw with the guy with Railroad Gandalf, like there's a lot of sitting around where people are just looking at your cars full of steel doing nothing.
Yep.
Yes. But the steel is not going to go bad. And all the trains involved here go relatively short distances. It's hard for them to accrue a lot of delay, right? Your shipments are slow, but they're pretty predictable. Now we're doing precision scheduled railroading. Okay, I'm doing the same shipment. But rather than make all these stops, we are going to bypass intermediate yards with one big train that goes 600 miles from the big yard in Chattanooga to the big yard in Harrisburg, Enola.
Yard masters hate him. This one weird trick.
Enola's not as big as it used to be, but it's still there, right? Now we're going to say we're going to say this train is going about Norfolk Southern system-wide average train speed of
9 miles an hour.
No, it is 21.9 miles an hour.
Jesus Christ.
Blistering. And they say America doesn't have high-speed rail.
I know.
Yes. So this train will take 27 hours to reach its destination and be recrewed 2 times. So, same process as before. On day 3, the train sets off, the big train. The first crew has about 12 hours on their shift. They can reasonably be expected to cover about 250 miles, enough to reach Bristol, Virginia down here, right? But you start to accrue delays, right? Sometimes it's a little thing like a brake test taking too long. Maybe a local train hasn't cleared the yard. Maybe there's a big train on the yard lead because it's too short, right?
Or just a unit train just appears out of nowhere and is like, I'm going to sit in the main line at like 20 miles per hour for a while. Yeah.
This is mine.
Giant Amtrak train that's like going between New York and Boston is like in your way.
Or mega regional. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. So, or it could be like a big thing, like there's a truck stuck on the tracks and they have to wait for a tow truck to go take it off. So we'll say the crew loses about 2 hours on the way up to Bristol, right? Which means they don't quite make it to Bristol. So they're stuck somewhere in like the Tennessee Valley. The call goes out to the other crews. It's like, okay, you're getting on a train right now. Come to the terminal, get in the van. And
I don't care if it's your kid's birthday.
Yeah.
Fuck you.
Yeah.
Fuck you.
Are you sick? Well, you should have scheduled that in advance.
Get in the van.
So they're recruited about 40 miles short of their away terminal. Meanwhile, the crew timed out. They're sitting there waiting for the van to bring them to the away terminal. They're in the middle of somewhere in the godforsaken Tennessee Valley. In the middle of the night, the banjo music is getting louder. It's not a great situation,
Got to start keeping a shotgun in the cab just in case.
So Crew 2 shows up. They've been bounced and bumped around in a van for an hour on dirt roads next to the train track. They're here. They should reasonably be able to get the train as far as about Harrisonburg, Virginia, which is somewhere around here, right?
JMU, baby.
And there's no crew change and no car switching in Roanoke. We've skipped that yard entirely.
Oh, good.
There is a big yard there that you have to go through, which means potential for big delays. There's also a lot of unit coal train traffic there.
Yep.
So maybe, someone's fat ass train is blocking the yard lead. Maybe there's
all the downsides of this yard, none of the upsides. Like, it's a convenient place to recruit. You don't have to drive people around in the middle of the night. But we're not going to do that. We're going to do that in order to get them stuck there.
Yeah, there's maybe there's like there's a bunch of unit trains going through all at once. Maybe something broke down. Maybe there's a truck that got stuck on the infamous Hollands Road crossing, which is I believe my uncle's shortcut to get to work. That was very unpredictable because it was faster than taking the bridge, but it was a 5-track crossing. So if you got stuck there, you got stuck there. So anyway, you lose another 3 hours at Roanoke. The train's 5 hours behind at this point. And then the line here hasn't been fully upgraded for these longer trains. So an unexpected delay in one train can pile up and down all the way up the main line because trains can't pass each other effectively, especially a really long one like this. So the train has hit a passing siding at, let's say, Buena Vista, Virginia, somewhere around here.
Buena Vista Social Club.
Yes, and the the crew times out. They had to get a new crew, probably from Bristol. They got to van them all the way up. I'm making up these terminal points, by the way. I don't know the actual ones.
Everyone's getting insanely demoralized because they know this is ridiculous.
Yeah.
Yes. So it's the morning of day 4 now. This train is now 5 hours late, but crew 3 could still reasonably be expected to get as far as Harrisburg if they make good time. But there's a problem here, which is the train is now off of its precise schedule.
Yep.
Right? This train is now not where it's supposed to be. So all of this hypothetical scheduling is for nothing. It's fucking up everything.
You've done the thing that we literally had a chart from like 1907 or whatever to avoid doing.
Yeah.
Yes.
You gotta let the train go at this time, and if it misses it, do the next time after that instead of in between, because you'll fuck everything.
Or even more basically, just make sure your trains and your infrastructure match each other. Like, it is entirely possible to run a scheduled railroad. Like most other places in the world do it. But if you run your scheduled railroad with all these asterisks where, like, oh, you still have these unscheduled unit trains, and oh, you still have sidings that are half the length of the trains you're running, and oh, we're not actually gonna really get our yards and mechanical forces and everything, invest in them enough so that they can really reliably deliver service, then you're gonna have like some weird puree of like freight train mess. And that's just everyone
unless you're gonna try and bring back the art of the double saw by, which I don't think anyone wants that.
Yeah.
For the uninitiated, the double saw by is a very complicated series of maneuvers with switching to allow 2 trains which are longer than the passing siding to still pass each other. It takes a very long time and it's very stupid. No one does it anymore. All right, so
I have a question in the midst of this, which is just to play devil's advocate, just to sort of like lurch myself over to the opposite side of the political compass. Why don't they unite to fight the real enemy, the Federal Railroad Administration, and crew time limits?
I've been saying, Alice.
Why don't they make the impoverished workers work longer?
You're already allowed to work them 12 hours as opposed to 8.
Yep.
Yeah. What if 14? What if as long as necessary?
I mean, in practice, you get in that van and you are spending at least another hour.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
and of course,
like the train.
No, it's like trucking is essentially what you're describing, Alice.
Yeah, exactly. Why don't we just load them up on amphetamines, cut all the regulation, You know, it might not be high-speed rail in the sense that the train is moving quickly, but it's high-speed rail in the sense that, you know, the fucking neurons are firing. Problem solved. You right? I have solved this like the Gordian knot, and the thanks that I get, not enough. Never going to be enough. I should get the Congressional Medal of Honor for this.
Oh my god!
So you got this situation where they want to get up to Harrisburg, right? And so, you know, but they're so delayed. You can't delay the rest of the system. This train keeps getting shunted into passing sidings and stuff. So they lose another 3 hours. They time out 50 miles short of their destination in Chambersburg, Pennsylvania, right?
Ooh, not a place you want to be stuck.
Yeah. And I had to call a fourth crew to bring it into Harrisburg, right? Where it, you know, this is the end of day 4. So the train took 2 days and 4 crews. 4 crews? Yeah, 4 crews to make it this far. Now, had this train not accrued all this delay, the yard at Harrisburg would have time to classify all the cars, get them moving the next day, but they have not done that, right? So on day 5, the cars are sorted. Day 6, they're on a train to Philadelphia, right? Which actually doesn't go like that. It goes more like that. And you know, the railroad delivers the cars a full 3 days faster than they would have otherwise, but 1 day later than scheduled.
And having also immiserated a bunch of workers.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And also, like, importantly, I think, you know, if you survey shippers and ask them what they want speed, but more importantly, they want reliability. You know, if they can predictably, like, if they can, like, you know, they can really believe and trust that their cars are going to come, you know, 8 days after they ship them from Birmingham. That's actually better than having it. Well, you know, they might get here in 5 days, and they might also get here in 22 or something like that. You know, which is frankly like that is how it works right now. You know, there's no reliability in the system, despite, you know, this at least theoretical effort to achieve that. And that is more so than anything else what holds people back from using.
If your priority is speed instead of reliability, and you're like willing to sacrifice reliability, just go to reduce that to absurdity. Fucking put it on a rocket, you know? Fire that on a suborbital trajectory, you know, from Birmingham to Philadelphia. It'll get there. The state it's going to get there in, don't know, but it's going to get there very quickly.
Crucially, although you've ruined crews' lives, you've also saved a lot on labor by doing so, because you're not classifying as many cars in yards.
Yep.
You know, and you're moving the train quicker, so it's more labor efficient to do so, even though it's late. Now the customer has a different experience, which is they don't know when the cars are going to show up. In the worst case scenario, let's say I ordered 3 cars of steel, and my siding only holds 3 cars. And I'm getting this on a regular basis. Well, if the train behind this one showed up on time, I'm going to have 6 cars that I can't fit in my siding that only holds 3. So the railroad is going to say, well, you couldn't accept the load we delivered, so we're going to take the cars, we're going to store them in the yard, we're going to charge you something called demurrage, which is a fee for being unable to accept delivery. It's
this is why you want to be like no loads refused.
Yes. Pretty much.
Good Lord.
Yeah, because if you refuse the load, you get charged demurrage. It's just it's a fact of life.
It's a bad time to be a bottom.
Yeah. So this is really bad. This is really bad for customers and shippers. It's really bad for crews. It's really bad for trying to attract customers to the railroad when the service is this unreliable. It's unsafe a lot of the times just because the trains are so long. You know, you know, when these trains stop because the crew timed out, a bunch of railroad crossings get blocked for a while.
Yeah.
You know, you know, it's a bad way to run the railroad, except it makes a lot of money. You know, and this, you know, it saves a lot on labor by abusing labor and doing these ridiculous runs. You know, it's why I sort of call PSR sort of a one weird trick to move trains faster by making them all late.
Hey, but the good news is that because they're all sort of nominally late, that also means that you can punish the crew for poor performance.
This is true. There's also all kinds of like surveillance and crap in the train cabs now. And you're very restricted on what you can do in the train cab, even when you're stopped, and you're going to be stopped for a long time. It's not
time to stare dead ahead into the dark for 12 hours.
Into the abyss.
Exactly.
And that's why you start dipping.
Yeah.
Gives you something to fucking do.
So Uday found this great chart.
I made it.
Oh, you made this one, yes.
Yeah. There's a very dedicated group of rail fans at Horseshoe Curve who like take notes on all the trains that pass by. And like huge shout out to them for doing this. They keep like long-term records of all their data. So you can just download a huge spreadsheet of like all the trains that passed Horseshoe Curve in 2019. For some people, that means you can see which locomotives that those trains had or whatever else the foamers want to know. For me, it means you can see when they pass what time they pass the curve, which allows me to make a graph like this one. So this is 4 different freight trains. And I used their data throughout 2019, and I made this graph showing sort of essentially the distribution of times that they arrived at the curve. So 20E is a freight train from Chicago, or they actually changed all the symbols recently, so now 20E is called something else. I think I want to say 22G or 20G. I don't know. Or no, 20. It would be 22X, not 22G. Yeah, because X is never mind. That's a tangent. Anyway, so that's a sort of high priority intermodal freight train from Chicago to northern New Jersey. 20W.
I think 20E is the eastbound one that goes from Jersey to Chicago.
Jersey, Chicago is westbound. I think 2020E.
Oh, right. Excuse me.
Yeah,
I forget how.
Norfolk Southern symbols are weird. Yeah. 20W is another train from Chicago to North Jersey, but really what it actually is it's a BNSF train that comes in from Los Angeles and is just handed off to Norfolk Southern in Chicago. 38G, that's a mixed freight train from a yard just outside of Pittsburgh to Camden, New Jersey. And now these days, I think it terminates in Abrams, Pennsylvania, which is near King of Prussia, if you know where that is.
Unfortunately, yes, we do.
And then 590 is a coal train. It's a coal unit train that runs from southwestern Pennsylvania to the export coal terminal in Baltimore. So you have a few different types of trains here. And as you can see, none of them, not even the high priority intermodal trains, have particularly consistent arrival times. So 20E tends to arrive somewhere between 8 p.m. and about 12:30 in the morning. 38G seems to get there, sometime between 12 and 6. 20W, which is like this, supposed to be this great cross-country train, is essentially like a bell curve.
It's one of the highest priority trains in the country.
Yep.
It gets there when it gets there.
It has a full normal distribution here.
Yeah. Honestly, it's pretty incredible, right? It's just like, okay. And then 590, which is again, a testament to the just unbelievable randomness of unit train operation. 590 is, it's not exactly a sort of a flat line, but it's pretty damn close. So it just kind of shows up when it wants to. And the fun part about 590 in particular is that this is a train that ends up on Amtrak's Northeast Corridor. So, that's fun. A nice sort of random addition to the
chaos train.
Yeah.
It's 590 the one that derailed?
Yeah,
either right outside of Perryville.
590, 592,
Amazing.
Whatever. Yeah, there's a few different symbols they use for the Baltimore export coal trains, but it very much could have been 590.
It shows up at any time, full of whatever, and then it gets in the way of
Mystery
an Amtrak,
train.
and then
And
gets
then
you
it derails.
fined.
Yes.
And then
it just
derails
flops. It is a petulant soccer player, yes.
It is.
I love this train. This is beautiful, it's just it fucks up on every possible level at once.
It's
Really,
just
95. Never stop working on yourself, no matter how inconvenient it is.
Yeah.
It's doing
when
its best.
does it show up? We don't know. What's it carrying? We don't know. Does it does it get where it's going efficiently? No. Does it get there at all? Also no. It's like barely a train. Like, this is sort of a philosophical thing. Like,
it's almost
how
like
many
Schrodinger's
things can
train,
you
know?
like
Yeah.
strip away? It's a ship of Theseus, right? How many elements of a train route can you strip away from a thing functionally and like leave it still a train?
So what the governor lady said, I'm sending in more trains.
Anyway, so I mean, the point here is, I mean, it's just to underline everything that Justin just talked about, right? So 2019, Norfolk Southern was already implementing PSR, and yet, in reality, these trains are not really that precise. And I mean, this has only gotten worse actually recently because of all, COVID disruption, crew shortages, making the trains even longer. American railroading is just not a precise art, and PSR, despite theoretically having the potential to make it a lot more precise because of its sort of, overlap with all these other long run problems in the industry and the way people think about the industry, it's just ends up actually making the problem worse. And that's bad. It's bad for shippers who, let's say, like, I don't know, maybe your container is on this 20W train. Like, if that train was more precise, you could be getting your container, I don't know, 12, 18 hours earlier than in this sort of random.
I also believe 20W and 20 or E are both trailer trains, not container trains. So they actually they are supposed to be. Oh, yeah. Okay. Well, yeah. One of them was probably the one that we saw derailed in the first slide.
Yeah. I was going to say, so the difference isn't just between getting your container sort of reliably and getting your container unpredictably. It's getting your container reliably or getting a phone call from Norfolk Southern being like, your container is on its side around Horseshoe.
I'm sorry. Your container is on its side on our track, and we're going to charge you for that.
Yeah, that's a fee. That's a fine. Stepped on the logo.
Yeah. So it's, I mean, you can run this sort of, this is something I just, I did this in R. This is very easy to like do, even like just Excel or whatever. Like you can take a lot of these railfan cams will have logs where all the railfans put in like the information of the trains going by. And if you, like me, have a passion for charts, one of the things you can do with that is like, literally just choose any of them and just do this with it. And you will always find that there is this unbelievable amount of variability in when the trains show up.
I need to see the statistics for Santa Fe Junction, seeing as how many derailments they've caught on virtual railfan over just like the past 2 months.
I know. There was one that was going around yesterday or day before, right? Some like auto rack train.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
it was moving at a good clip too.
It was, yeah,
on a bridge.
Hey, do you want high speed rail or not?
Exactly.
Not really at this point.
What do you want at this point, Liam?
There was
I want to go lie on my side on my bathroom floor and just kind of like experience suffering for a while and hope to feel better.
There was a chart I probably should have thrown in this podcast somewhere. I did not. That was published in Trains Magazine earlier this year. The Surface Transportation Board, which is successor to the ICC, has forced railroads to start publishing on-time performance, and it's bad.
It's really bad. Yeah.
The Norfolk Southern.
They invented
a
line for this.
Yeah. Norfolk Southern in particular. Less than 50% of carloads are delivered on time. And the definition of on time is within 24 hours of schedule.
That is not how on time works.
No, meanwhile, of course, in Switzerland, like 90% of their freight carloads are delivered within 20 minutes of schedule. So, I mean, like this isn't like an unsolvable problem. This is really a sort of very contingent sort of manufactured problem of sort of the railroading as we do it in the US, which is to say, for all we might hear about how great American freight railroads are, like, yes, they do keep a lot of trucks off the road and, they're better than some other ones, but they are so much worse than what they could be,
Yes.
Yeah.
The Swiss railways aren't better because of like a sort of innate biological, cultural Swiss superiority that you only get by like all of the sort of marching into town with a halberd and stopping women from voting for 700 years or whatever.
No, they use MP5s now.
Yeah, and in fact, the Swiss actually are up against much higher odds than the American railroads. You know, they have all this passenger traffic. You know, their freight trains have couplers that are like shit, and
Yes.
they're shorter. You know, the cars can carry a lot less stuff.
Bunch of weird mountain curves that they didn't dynamite through in the 1910s.
Yeah,
Everything's on containers, which are hard to unload on sidings.
They've all the structural factors point against them, and yet they achieve, I think, relatively similar like freight mode share to the U.S. On a much objectively more competently operated system.
It's much more complex operations where you have shit like the local IKEA gets all its stuff by a railroad spur as opposed to buy a truck.
It's remarkably effective.
It's a cool system.
It is. So this is it's the point that I think is just so important to drive home about all of this is, badly done railroading is not just bad for labor and for the people who live along railroad lines itself. It also just really shrinks the potential expansiveness of the railroading business itself, unambitious, poorly implemented scheduling that sort of just, bathed in this sort of operating productivity obsession that railroads have had so long. It's
self-sabotaging.
Yeah, it's shrinking the pie. It's bad. At the end of the day, it's just not actually that good business for them. And I think I'm a little hopeful that between the regulatory pressure and the events of the past few years that railroads might, change their ways a little bit. But it's just not a sustainable model at the end of the day. None of the incentives and none of the sort of deeply ingrained cultural institutional factors are pointing in the right direction here. Yeah. Anyway, so next slide, I guess. So
take a quick bathroom break. I'll be right back.
Yeah, I can blab for a little while.
Good luck, Alice.
Oh God. Okay. Yeah, I'm holding it down. I'm pinching the bridge of my nose. I'm trying to maintain thinking about anything else other than my stomach hurting. So let's talk about some graphs. Let's talk about some more graphs. We got some intersecting lines now. We've moved up to graphs 201.
We do. So here we have a blue line, and that blue line is a passenger train.
That represents the police, the thin blue line between your container getting there on time and chaos.
Yeah, so we have indeed this thin blue line. And the thin blue line is traveling upwards. And so on the y-axis here, we have distance, and on the x-axis, we have time. So this train is, moving along, 400 miles of railroad over 4 hours. And that's our passenger train. And it's, picking up people along the way.
That's our mega regional.
Exactly. It's our 140 car, train number 66 or whatever. And somewhere along the way,
I really like this idea. We should expand this. Really, if you want to have a transcontinental railroad, have a transcontinental railroad.
Exactly.
Have the train still moving, people getting on and off the same train in Los Angeles and New York.
Exactly.
It can be done.
One big conveyor belt that's also a train.
That's right. Well, I mean, the Swiss did this. If we're going to go back to Switzerland, is they sort of deliberately set that record for longest. I think longest passenger train just by coupling as much of their shit together as they could.
Yeah.
So yeah, why can't Americans do it? And why can't Americans humiliate the Swiss?
Yeah. Exactly.
Exactly. Bring back that spirit of international competition.
Exactly. But yeah, so
we need to stir up some jingoism. We need to be more racist against
nationalism,
the Swiss.
but only for trains.
Yeah, exactly. Right. We need to make the average American competitive with the Swiss.
Hate the
on
Swiss.
A train basis.
Agree.
Yeah, exactly. So we need to do some stereotyping, some fear mongering. We need to sort of have big posters in public places of sort of smug looking Swiss people and be like, you want this guy to have a longer train than you?
Do you?
Yeah.
Have an anti-yodeling campaign.
That's right.
Yeah. That would definitely be an interesting timeline to watch.
Amtrak Public Relations, I am available to consult on this
Well,
at any time.
It is funny because they constantly get dunked on in their replies that I always laugh at.
Where was I with this?
Doing like social media PR for a railroad is like one of the worst. That's a circle of hell. Not a high one, but it's one.
It is definitely, yeah.
Anyway, so you have this your thin blue line train that's going about its business, and it's going to have to intersect with the red line, your freight train, somewhere.
Yes, but we don't know where because the freight train
within that range.
Yeah,
yes.
The freight train is just we don't know when it's going to come, but
it's vibing. It's doing whatever.
Somewhere along there, this passenger train is going to have to pass that freight train. Now, if we knew what time that freight train was going to arrive at different points, like i.e., if that freight train had an actually reliable and delivered schedule, you could just build a passing track where the two trains were scheduled to meet. But because the freight train has the schedule predictability of, I don't know, me waking up on a Saturday morning, it's gonna you're gonna either have to build like 100+ miles of like passing track and be like, okay, well, somewhere in here,
less than that precision because you do wake up in the morning.
Yeah. Exactly, that's true.
Sunday morning where that apparently still counts. Or Friday night where that apparently still counts.
This is a good point. Yeah. But yeah, so like you have to either build a ton of track or you build less track and then are like, well, I just hope that these two trains don't catch up to each other in the middle portion, in the scenario where you build a bunch of shorter track, like shorter passing tracks. Because then you end up with delays and the passengers are unhappy and there's angry Twitter complaints and everyone loses. So basically, I mean, the upshot here is that having unscheduled, unstructured freight operations is not only bad for shippers, it also just makes all of these expansion plans for passenger service unbelievably difficult to accomplish because you're either exposing future rail passengers to a bunch of unreliability or you're spending however many hundreds of millions of dollars, like essentially like bulletproofing your infrastructure against like random freight trains coming along and messing up your passenger timetable.
It is quite. I mean, this is why, like, here in Pennsylvania, there is one train a day from Philadelphia to Pittsburgh.
Well, it's fucking embarrassing.
And they want to increase that in the next 5 years to two passenger trains a day.
Wow.
From Philadelphia to Pittsburgh.
Incredible.
And in order to do that, they are spending something like $200 million on passing sidings.
Yeah.
For an extra passenger train per day.
Yep.
And this is because of the schedule unreliability that you have to do that, or you have to accept random stupid delays constantly.
Absolutely. And I mean, and the other really nuts thing about this is that there's like, even within the US, there's actually a few parts of the country that actually have figured out how to do this properly. BNSF has seemingly cultivated a very good working relationship with the rail planners in California. And they've scheduled freight trains like entirely along the line to San Diego. Now there's only a few freight trains a day there. It's easy, so it's easier. But I believe there's also like at least like done a sort of similar like peg development or path development sort of thing for the very busy main line between San Bernardino and Los Angeles. So now you can, they're talking about, half hourly or hourly Metrolink service and expanding, the Pacific Surfliners. And they're doing all these things within sort of a defined operating plan that allows them to be like, okay, so, if we want to run X many more trains at Y times, we're going to have to put in like exactly this bit of track here and exactly this bit of track here. And that's going to open up these new sort of schedule paths and these new frequencies. So even in the US, like there is precedent for this being possible for scheduled freight and passenger service to coexist and grow together, but it just requires a different sort of approach to freight railroading and a different sort of institutional outlook from really everybody involved. That is currently sort of made really fundamentally difficult, if not impossible, by the obsessive like cost cutting and sort of infrastructure second, profits first mentality that a lot of these railroads have adopted.
There seems to have also been sort of a synthesis in Virginia, where I would say trains to like Richmond and Roanoke are surprisingly reliable for what they are. Well, I will say when the Roanoke train fucks up, it fucks up bad.
Oh, it sure does.
Yeah.
You show up there at 11 p.m.
You get there when you get there, motherfucker. Would you like another beer?
Yes. That's what I did. I went to the cafe
British.
car. I was on the train to Roanoke. I was pretty sloshed, actually, because it's a long train.
Oh, boy.
I realized when we were coming into Roanoke, I was like, cafe car is going to close in a minute. I can just feel it in my bones. Norfolk Southern's going to do us dirty.
Yep.
And I was like, I ran to the cafe car. I was like, can I have one last beer, please? And the guy was like, because I think Norfolk Southern's going to do us dirty. And he was like, you're right. And he served me a beer. And then sure enough, we sat in a passing siding for 2 hours.
Oh dear.
We were like 15 minutes out of town.
You have a sort of like preternatural ability at this point. This is sort of like minor wizardry.
Yeah, frankly.
The train whisperer.
Yeah. Just get a sense like this train is gonna fuck me.
Yeah.
That's rule 34, and the French call it frottage. All right, let's fucking wrap this bitch up. I am so goddamn hungry. Alice is dying.
Yes. I feel atrocious.
Yeah.
Like I say, like the guy who fell into the hot acid vat is a pussy compared to us.
All right, this one I'll do it very quickly through. Basically, sort of trying to minimize the complexity of operations under PSR, will lead you to do things like, instead of having, so this is Los Angeles for context, this map. And it's a map of Union Pacific's terminals in Los Angeles. Union Pacific here on this map, of course, is blue because,
confused the hell out of me because I'm like, wait a second, Chicago isn't like. I saw this as this is a map of the United States, which has been seriously reconfigured.
United States as Los Angeles.
Yes.
Like that.
They moved Denver, Kansas City, El Paso, Laredo, Houston, Salt Lake City, St. Louis, Twin Cities, Council Bluffs, and San Antonio into Long Beach.
Exactly.
Where they belong. And then Chicago's just up here.
So, yeah, Chicago's the city of industry.
Chicago is actually in 2 locations.
Yeah. Greater Chicago.
Shit, so it is. The City and the City by China Mirville.
I should know this having made this map. But yeah, basically, so Union Pacific is a part of their PSR effort. It used to be that they offered, like each one of these 4 terminals, all of which are, quite a good distance apart, used to offer service to a bunch of different destinations. So, you could ship from, the rightmost of them to, I don't know, Dallas or Houston. I actually don't know if that was necessarily what was offered, but basically there was more options than Chicago previously. But to simplify their operations, they're like, okay, we're going to dedicate certain terminals to certain sort of directions or like, just cities of traffic. So,
I immediately see the problem. It simplifies their operations, complicates everyone else's because you have to truck all of this shit across from one yard to another yard.
Yeah.
And it takes you like 8 hours. You're just sitting in traffic.
Exactly.
They just built this brand new Alameda corridor, and their first reaction is, yeah, let's move all that traffic onto trucks.
Exactly.
Let's not use it. Yeah, it's better to build it and not use it.
Well, the government helped them build it, so of course they're not going to use
it. Honestly, the whole Los Angeles freight policy, well, that was not a word, freight planning and policy, like sort of disaster would be a great episode of this show. But again, for another time, because it really is just like unbelievable amounts of chaos and fun.
Well, there's your problem bonus episode, the city of Los Angeles.
Yes.
I'm in favor.
From Mulholland to the Alameda corridor.
Let me tell you why the Lakers are a poverty franchise now.
Anyway, so I mean, the upshot here is that, like one of the problems, and this is not just a PSR problem, this is just sort of a freight policy problem more broadly, is that, all of these efforts that are being made to simplify rail ops, they have a positive impact on rail operations. It makes Union Pacific's lives simpler. But it also means that, all these truckers are working more. There's more sort of truck-driven emissions in the air. Truck driver shortages hit that much harder.
So like consolidation of like a narrow solipsistic view of what a railroad does, where it doesn't exist in a society, and
exactly,
it simply goes A to B and brings
the railroad ends where the track ends. That's not part of a much broader sort of system and set of
point you were hitting on earlier. Sure.
Well, think about it. We did invent the innovative new solution of paying drayage truckers negative wages.
Yeah,
that's amazing.
One of the I wrote a long blog post on Los Angeles last summer, and one of the craziest statistics I found in that is that from 1974 or so to the 1990s, not even to present, to the 1990s, the real cost of draining a container from the ports to like rail yards around downtown Los Angeles fell by like more than half. Simply because,
Wow.
we went from Teamster truckers to, these supposedly independent contractors.
I mean, union busting, it works. That's why they do it.
Yeah.
It saves you a lot of money.
For those
And
uninitiated who are listening to the podcast, drayage is moving a container from one port to another port. A lot of times, the way the industry works now, everyone's an independent contractor, right? And generally, they're very poor. They may be illegal immigrants, and essentially, these lessers will say, "All right, we'll put you on a lease to own scheme for a big rig." Right. And then
it's usually a really shitty big rig too.
Yeah. Your wages are docked directly to pay for the big rig, which means if you don't make enough money, although you're doing work, you are effectively paid a negative wage for that day. It's very predatory. Most people do not, because it's leased to own, so there's no equity in the truck. Right, not that truck equity is.
But you're also still usually paying like maintenance and gas, and also because you're technically
essentially an Uber for freight. Yeah,
exactly. No, it's exactly that. Yeah, and there's no working regulations. There's no minimum wage. There's no healthcare. It's like it's all the.
Yeah.
It's just nasty
really
stuff.
Bad. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And it's literally the animating sort of sinew of the modern economy. Without drayage, truckers, and sort of just modern trucking in general, like. A lot of what we currently consume and the way we currently consume it just would not exist. Like
my treats.
It's like we've literally created like a goods movement system that is predicated on unbelievably exploitative labor practices.
The ones who drive away from a malus.
And this is how it becomes economical for a ship with 20,000 containers on it to pull into Long Beach and have 20,000 truck trips result from it rather than 10 or 12 trains.
And it's funny because, I mean, not funny, it's horrible, but one of the trends recently has been actually shipping less and less stuff by trains directly from ports and instead sort of trucking it to like an inland distribution center where a bunch of, also terribly treated workers like sort the goods and sort of repackage them and arrange them in such a way that sort of facilitates and cheapens inland distribution. And then they're loaded, then they're trucked either, back to downtown Los Angeles or to, one of the intermodal terminals near San Bernardino, and then loaded on a train to go inland. And that, I mean, talk about like you're racking up, 100, 200 miles of truck travel there, all those emissions. It's this unbelievably large coordination failure where we've created not only like again an economic system that's predicated on all of this exploited labor, but also a system that relies on kids in the Inland Empire and along I-710 like having like just terrifyingly high asthma rates and people just getting all these respiratory diseases and illnesses. It's as consumers it's sort of abstract from us, but it's like the visceral experience of these modern logistics and freight systems is horrifying. And yeah.
Hey kid, you want a CDL?
You want to do drayage for negative $5 an hour?
Yeah.
You want to do drayage?
Yeah, super fucked up.
Yeah. Man, American Truck Simulator really sanitizes that industry.
This is true, yes. American Drayage Simulator.
Yeah,
you do the same route over and over again and never make money.
Yeah. Another good book recommendation, Getting the Goods. It's by Edna Bonanich. It's in my bag somewhere. And Jake Wilson, maybe. But it's a bit dated now, but a lot of the problems it describes are like very much still relevant. And it's just a really, really great sort of like holistic look at the problems and like practices of the modern logistics economy in Los Angeles. I think it should be required reading for everybody, but I certainly
we're assigning the book now.
Yeah, short of dictatorial powers over the curricula of people, I will certainly recommend it strongly.
Speaking of dictatorial powers,
we should finish this episode. Yes. The labor side.
The labor side, yeah.
Speaking of dictatorial powers,
yeah, exactly.
I mean, sort of as we spoke about before, this model of railroading predicted on very unreliable service, cost minimization, trains that arrive and depart at random times puts immense stress on crews, and it doesn't have to be this way, right? And this is why we've had these major labor disputes, which have not been about wages, they've been about quality of life.
We made a joke about this on the Newfoundland Railway episode where we're like Franz Kafka loading and unloading cargo, and his boss being like, listen, you got fucking 2 extra legs now that you're a bug, so you can move like 20% faster.
Right. And they're doing it. They're doing it in real life. It's so fucking depressing. It's wild.
And all the way that PSR has been implemented, is really the core of why schedules are so unpredictable. This is why workers' lives
evil PSR instead of
they did evil PSR. Yeah,
evil PSR.
And their lives are completely controlled by the big railroads, and this is also why the railroads were so reluctant to do a basic thing like sick days, because
they have no room to do that.
Yeah, their business model relies on you being at their whim at all times. The other thing that is really useful to note here is that these labor disputes were entirely from employees of Class 1 freight railroads. So, because Amtrak crews, commuter rail crews, short line crews, so on and so forth, they don't have these problems because either their trains run on real schedules or you're not chasing that operating ratio, so you don't have to run everything as this like bare bones system.
Right.
Yeah. And also, like, whatever the railroads might say, they're like, it not only can be done, but has been done to, like, actually, even with the sort of current model, give train crews more regular schedules. Like, in the 90s, Conrail did an experiment with the FRA to reduce actually like fatigue related crashes and accidents, where they gave about 75% of the crews running between Toledo and Buffalo, I believe, or maybe it was Toledo and Cleveland, one of the two, regular assignments. So they had regular hours and a regular train they ran, and they knew what time they'd be like sleeping, and it gave them predictability, and it worked. It worked great. Now the problem, of course, is that that corridor has a very large number of sort of relatively more schedule adherent intermodal trains versus unreliable unit trains and sort of errant mixed freight trains. So that was a very easy environment to do that in. And as these operations have gotten more complicated, and as you try to expand that to other corridors, you really end up having to actually schedule things properly to make progress here. So those sorts of regular jobs, they're called assigned service. You can do them for a yard crew pretty easily. You can do them for a freight train that goes and serves customers. But for the road freight trains, you're going to have to actually write like an actual timetable for those before you can really start, running
the other thing to note is that a lot of the stuff only really got bad over the past 5 or 6 years. As the PSR model became the standard. And it was not good before, but it's really bad now.
It's real bad now, right?
Well, because they just hugely reduced the number of crews that they had at all these terminals. So before you'd have unpredictability, but there is a bit more flexibility and give in the crew rosters. So
now
we're
running on razor thin.
Exactly. Yeah. So now everybody has to be there all the time, and
even people with like a lot of seniority are getting
exactly. Fucked. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And it ends up just. All this stuff collides and creates just a bad scene.
And there's other aspects of this that we haven't really talked about. The safety standards are down. Yard crews are overworked. There's really bad morale among the entire workforce.
Yeah.
These trains.
Because it's so Kafkaesque apart from everything else.
Right. Truly. I mean, the fact that we got one sick day and leadership of the unions was treating that as a win was fucking
one. Well, BLET did vote out their president yesterday.
Yeah, I did see that. I was blaming I was not blaming the rank and file there.
Yes. That does lead us to the question of what is to be done.
Probably nothing.
Parody redacted. All I want to do is parody, etc. I mean, the thing is, right? Like, most people don't want to strike. It's like a high bar, even if you hate your job, because it's a difficult confrontational thing that you're sort of primed more or less.
You're taking a big risk to do it,
want to do. Yeah. Luckily for us and unluckily for workers, capital keeps fucking containing the seeds of its own destruction. And so it keeps making the decisions that make working in anything, but in this case, railroads, so intolerable that people keep doing it. And the answer of what is to be done is, fucking the process of dialectical materialism resulting in parity redacted, But that's not us, right? That's me talking. But we're not me right now. We're Pete Buttigieg, as we said in the beginning of this. So, what is the Pete Buttigieg sort of top-down managerial answer to how do we fix railroads in the United States?
I guess if we want to start there, we can talk about the railroad solution to this idea. The big incoming problem. The one that we're going to really see.
No one working, man.
Yeah, in the next 3 years,
no one wants to work anymore.
This labor shortage is going to get much worse because working conditions haven't been improved. The strike was a real off ramp from the bad stuff that's going to happen in the next couple of years. This is kind of like the averting this strike. Joe Biden saying no strike, everything's fixed. This has really screwed us a couple years down the road.
Yeah,
because you're going to lose. You're gonna, by winning the battle, you lost the war. It's a direct through line there.
Pyrrhic victory.
Yes. Well, I think it's. I think it's not even a Pyrrhic victory. Is there like a word for like you won the battle, which directly causes you to lose the war? Like,
it's a Pyrrhic victory.
I thought there was like I thought that was like you won the battle, but you lost the war incidentally.
Oh, I don't know.
No, I don't know. I think it's a victory that causes your defeat.
Oh, okay. Well, let's go with that one.
I could be wrong. Yeah. I could be wrong. Let's have a look at related terms here. Could it be a Cadmean victory? Yes. A victory involving one's own ruin.
Yes. So this was sort of an off-ramp
victory.
Yeah. The strike was sort of this sort of off-ramp where the railroads would be forced to change their operating practices in order to provide workers with, actual sick days, actual time off. It would require you to really have to put in the work to provide better schedules, to do all of this stuff. And, at the moment, the business practices of the railroads simply do not allow for any kind of time off at all. And they're not going to change that unless they're absolutely forced to. So the railroad's idea has, and they're like, all right, we can't do time off. We can't do all this stuff. We're having trouble recruiting because our workplace is so bad. Let's go from 2 people in the locomotive cab to 1 person in the locomotive cab.
Saves weight, more efficient.
Right? So you go to
now you can't be on your phone, but also you don't have anyone to talk to.
Yes.
Yeah, that's why people start drinking a lot.
So you're doubling down on this productivity idea at the expense of, safety and reliability, right?
At the expense of your shit getting there, yeah.
Yeah, it costs of doing business. Now, one-man crews have been like the holy grail for the railroad industry for a long time. And the thing is, they want to do it without any of the commensurate like improvements in infrastructure and safety and so on and so forth that would allow that to happen. Because in Europe, this is fairly common, right?
But they sort of, they want to preserve the chaotic environment they have right now, but also,
Yes. And I mean, there's arguments that like, okay, well, we have these new signaling systems like positive train control now, which is kind of fake. We have all this exciting stuff. We should be able to run one-man crews. Union Pacific is starting this experiment, I think in a couple of weeks, where they're gonna say, all right, we're going to have people called expediters.
Yes, I saw this.
In a restaurant?
They will perform the role of conductor, but not from on the train. They will be in a truck and will be dispatched to the location of a train if there is a problem.
Motherfucker, what?
Get there, drive up to you. You're in the truck hearing banjo music getting closer.
Yeah.
I mean, you're in the train hearing the banjo music getting closer, and a guy in a truck drives up, rolls the window down, throws a brick through the window with like, just deal with it written on there, and then drives off again.
That's fucking nuts, dude.
Yeah, so
Incredible.
if you're
Thanks.
in a situation where, you know, I don't know, a coupler breaks 55 cars down the train, you know, you can't leave the cab or even check on what the problem is because you got to be in the cab. You got to call Union
Send a
Pacific
guy.
and say, "I will send a guy eventually."
Yep.
So Union Pacific thinks this will actually be a more efficient system, and I'm always suspicious when anyone says anything about efficiency because that's always
That always
efficient in
means
terms
fucking
of
over
what?
labor, basically. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, you could do one-man crews if you were like, okay, we're going to install European train control system. We're going to run trains a quarter the size. We're going to run them shorter distances. We're going to have higher track maintenance and car maintenance standards, so on and so forth. But, you know,
We're going to become Europe, basically.
Yes, basically. Sure. And you have to, the railroads don't want to do this. I think the one-man crew thing is mostly there to frighten labor as opposed to something that anyone actually thinks is feasible.
We will get to this when we do. I want to do a companion episode to this about why British railways are fucked.
Yes.
And we'll get to sort of some of the conservative government's demands for reform, which are along very similar lines.
Please do that. I'd be very curious to hear. I don't know enough.
See if we can't get Gareth on.
That'll be fun.
So the other option is, so Railroad Workers United, which is a sort of a caucus of rank and file railroad workers within the several craft unions which compose, the railroad industry. They're just saying straight up, we need to nationalize the railroads.
It's time. It's a good idea.
I mean, it's about the only way you could do it at this point because they're providing such bad service. They're treating their workers so badly and so on and so forth. And, you know, they're not investing in infrastructure and not working in the public interest that this is the obvious thing to do is nationalize the railroads, just put it under government control. I disagree a little. Yeah, I disagree a little bit on the specifics here because the RWU idea is you nationalize the railroads and have sort of an open access agreement, you know, where different companies run different trains on it. I think you need to go do top to bottom nationalization. You know, I think that would result in a much better system. I don't think you can divorce operations from infrastructure in that way.
We tried, you know, we in Britain we managed to do rail track and train operating companies, and look where it's gotten us.
That's gone very poorly. Yeah. Yes.
It's bad in the US when you're looking at sort of the British settlement of powers in the railway system, and this would be an improvement for us.
Yeah. You know, I think what I would say about nationalization is I think like I think I definitely share your concerns about sort of that model, Justin. I think also, I mean, you know, having spent some of my life working in the sort of transit space, I think it's also obviously you want to build up the state capacity and required institutional supports to actually do it well before you go ahead and take over the railways, because you want to be sort of putting them on a good footing to succeed under government management. But I also will say that whatever you end up doing, I think there's very strong, just like even basic geographic arguments for nationalization or some like greater government intervention in railroading to, make them do things they're not doing right now, or, support new services or whatever. Like one of the problems you actually see written about a lot in trade publications that cater to like intermodal shippers, for example, is the complete lack of intermodal services between cities within like 200 or 300 miles of the Mississippi River. So like, you can ship a container from New York to Chicago. You can ship a container from Atlanta to, I don't know, I think you can do it, Atlanta, Cincinnati. I think they offer that. Or like Jacksonville to Memphis, or I don't know, whatever other like medium distance pairs you like. But very few railroads offer services between like, I don't know, Minneapolis and Columbus, Ohio, or between like Kansas City and or better example, or like Dallas and Detroit or whatever. Actually, maybe they do offer Dallas, Detroit. But basically these sort of short
I seem to remember you posting like a map of railroad intermodal services, and it was like this Gordian knot of one-way services.
Yeah, but basically, sort of the point there is that you
can ship from Louisville to Dayton one way.
Exactly.
The other way, oh boy.
Yeah, no, you better get a truck for that. Yeah. But I think, the point with the Mississippi particularly is that the sort of relative underdevelopment of intermodal services in that particular region has everything to do with the fact that if you wanted to ship a container from, say, Minneapolis to Columbus, you'd have to interchange railroads in Chicago. And because, BNSF or UP would be getting like I don't know, 400 miles from Minneapolis to Chicago, they'd be getting that much revenue and then have to give it over to CSX or Southern, which would then get, I don't know, 200 miles of revenue to get it, or 300 miles from Chicago to Columbus. That's not very attractive to railroads who could be using their capacity or their operating rate, like their operating resources to ship containers from Chicago to North Jersey or from Chicago to Atlanta, which are further. So you end up with this, the very contingent geography of like railroad capital, where it's sort of split down the Mississippi River and sort of along this like imaginary line that goes through like Chicago, St. Louis, Memphis, New Orleans. You end up with, like these policy failures where markets that have real sort of amounts of freight moving in them just don't get rail service because as it so happens, railroads, geographies don't match them well. And that's something that, public policy should be involved in solving. Because
I'm hearing all these city names right now, and I'm imagining Matt Iglesias' head imploding because he believes all these places are hamlets.
Yeah. Train discourse on Twitter these days is a lot of fun.
Oh yeah.
And I really enjoyed watching everyone's head explode when Amtrak initially posted the sort of Connects US map. Because I guess people hadn't seen a population density map of the US in a while. So
no one knew that Columbus has over 1 million people.
Yeah, wild.
Yeah.
Big if true.
People live in Ohio?
Yeah. All those voters we spend a lot of time talking about every 4 years, they're real.
They're all in diners talking to New York Times guys.
Yeah. The Ohio is just a network of diners.
Yes.
Exactly. But I mean, I think that basically my point here, I'm making it in the most roundabout and obfuscated way possible, is that there are a lot of sort of policy problems and sort of environmental problems that result from those policy problems that have everything to do with sort of the weird structure of American sort of railroad capitalism and whatever it is. And, I hope something does change. That needs to be fixed. Like that is something that governments should be involved in fixing, and should be involved in doing better, because it's a coordination problem. And no matter how good railroads might end up being, maybe like tomorrow we're going to wake up to headlines about how they're all rejecting the operating ratio and are going to start operating themselves as sort of good corporate citizens. Like that sort of those basic incentive problems that come from their geography, those are very hard to fix. And that's a policy problem. And I mean, there's other sort of layers to that, right? The Chicago interchange is itself a huge sort of coordination policy problem that needs even more government effort on top of the create effort to fix.
I feel like you also have the fundamental issue with like trying to correct problems with the railroads, I think, is that they make a whole lot of money.
Yeah.
You are looking at a situation whereby, if I am an economist, I look at those numbers and I'm like, damn, railroads are great.
Yeah,
that's fantastic. They're making loads of money. These companies are really good and healthy and good for the economy. And it's like,
the line keeps going up.
The line went up, and this is why I feel like all these. It would be very difficult to do all these policies solutions because, well, A, no one cares about freight rail, and B, we're going to keep riding this line until it crashes into the moon and explodes.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's also worth noting here that, there was a 10-year period when everybody in Congress was thinking about freight railroads in the 70s because they were doing so badly. But the sort of collective political imagination at that time was not let's sort of make a rail network that works for everybody and sort of, achieves good policy outcomes on a holistic basis. It's no, let's return these carriers to profit, and that will just be good. So I think, it's there's so many different layers of failures of capitalism, failures of civic political imagination, failures of infrastructure that are just all sort of layered together and coalesce to create this crisis we're in right now, where climate change is bearing down on us, and these workers are suffering, and we have this rail network that's just not working, or not working as good as it should be.
I have to also mention, because I put their picture in here, there is a something called the Steel Interstate Coalition, which is a bunch of folks who are like advocating for what if the government built a lot of brand new railroad right of ways, that were electrified, so on and so forth. This is another like open access thing, which is again, I think the open access model very questionable. But they have nice renderings, so I put it in here. But this also doesn't solve the problem of like getting cars out of yards.
Again, it's an in-between solution, not a yard solution. Only other thing I'll mention, just to go back to the whole Minneapolis example, is actually in a weird way allowing more mergers would help with the geographic problems, but of course you end up with some potential competition problems and everything too. So that's
I don't think railroads have ever meaningfully competed, so
railroad competition is a weird thing. Although who knows, maybe the STB will wake up and decide on their whole reciprocal switching rulemaking thing that we're actually going to have reciprocal switching, and then it is a real thing.
Like Amy Klobuchar somehow gets her idea of let's break up the big railroads, which actually I think would be a step in the wrong direction, but it would be funny.
Bigger is better with railroads.
Yes.
It's just that you need to balance sort of the big betterness with adequate sort of protections for the public interest.
And for workers.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, what did we learn?
I really like the expediter idea. I think that's really funny. Just we're gonna send a guy to drive 4 hours in the dark in a truck to like maybe help you.
Yeah, maybe not. Who knows?
Maybe not. This is not insulting.
Spin the wheel, baby.
This will certainly not like make you want to strike more than you already did.
Definitely nothing bad will happen there. There is some movement in Congress right now to mandate 2-man crews, not in Congress, in the FRA, which I believe can make that rule arbitrarily, which probably a good idea because Class 1 railroads are definitely not going to develop the infrastructure to do 1-man crews safely.
No.
It'll be interesting.
We should do that, and we should also maybe like not break the strike.
Yeah,
just a thought.
And if you're a leftist or a so-called leftist who believes that strike breaking but woke, absolutely go fuck yourself.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll say if you can become a solidarity member of Railroad Workers United, if you support their cause, put a link in that in the description. Pay some monthly dues to further this cause of more left-wing railroad organizing. Anyway, we have a segment on this podcast called Safety Third.
I never thought we'd get here.
Shake hands with danger.
Hello? Well, there's your problem, peeps. I've just gotten into your pod and have a story to help add to the fact that my home state of New Jersey is a pile of trash.
I like New Jersey.
Disagree.
I also like New Jersey.
Yeah. I enjoy the Bruce Springsteen song Atlantic City.
I'm the one New Yorker.
New Jersey.
We're in the other Bruce Springsteen city. I worked for a plumber for a year or two as a general helper type with the hope of apprenticing under him. He did a lot of backflow valve testing and a lot of standing contracts to be the on-call plumber for the buildings he did backflow tests on. One of these buildings was the Berkeley Oceanfront Hotel here in Ashbury Park.
Oh boy,
beautiful!
Boy.
Yes, it's one of these. One of the few remaining old-fashioned New Jersey seaside hotels.
Been getting into Boardwalk Empire, so this is good.
Nice, good choice.
The boss called me around 8 p.m. after our regular work hours and needs me to come in. I showed up and we head to the hotel. The boss tells me they have a pinhole leak in their heating system somewhere in the basement. And when we arrive, the hotel's handyman brought us down to show us the issue. The basement of the hotel had about 4 to 5 feet of water in it, and one of the 13
that's the
inch
aquarium. That's the aquarium. Don't worry about it.
Second flooded hotel of the episode.
That's right.
One of the 13 inch
1,500 dead tropical fish.
One of the 13-inch water lines coming off of the main has a pencil-sized hole in it. Shooting water out is at high enough speed that it had acted like a water jet cutter and cut a hole through the HVAC duct next to it.
Oh my god.
Hell yeah.
We got the pressure shut off at the main, cutting water to the whole entire hotel in the process. And we started investigating the system and come to realize a few things. The basement being flooded wasn't supposed to be possible, as this was after Hurricane Sandy, and most buildings had been retrofit with stronger sump pumps and such to handle excess flooding. But apparently this building had not been required to do so, we were told, because they were grandfathered in as a historic building. I believe you should still have to install a sump pump. The basement is generally not historically protected.
If you drown, right, it doesn't count if it's in a historic building.
I guess so, yeah. Additionally, they had no shutoff valves on any of their larger pipes, as again, they were grandfathered in and did not require them.
You gotta stop grandfathering shit in.
You don't grandfather in plumbing. You should grandfather in plumbing.
You gotta have, these are historic lead pipes.
Yeah, I have a historic water heater.
Historic. Yeah, go ahead.
The result was my boss and I working for 16 hours straight, using our pumps along with the few pumps the building had in its basement to empty the basement and drain the system, which because of where the hole was,
bailing this like a sinking boat.
Yes, sinking hotel next to the seaside.
Yeah.
God.
Waterfront views for everyone.
Which, because of where the hole was, required the draining of the building's boiler and radiator systems. That's going to be fun to refill.
It doesn't get cold in New Jersey.
Yeah.
It doesn't get cold in New Jersey. It doesn't get cold in New Jersey.
When trying to get to the hole...
I actually love the shore in winter. It's so nice.
That actually is very nice, yeah. Haven't been down there in a while.
I think I'm going to Christmas.
Ooh.
Yeah.
When trying to get to the hole to diagnose the problem, we could not reach it with any of the ladders we had on the truck. And after fishing around in the water in the basement, we found one that could get us onto an adjacent pipe that we then had to shimmy along to get to the hole.
Oh, we're having to do like platforming segments at work.
Yeah. Oh, I got a platform today.
I mean, Mario's a plumber. He does that every day of his life. So,
yeah. We had to order a new pipe from a specialty pipe fitter that delivered it from Philly the next morning. And my boss actually said, "Don't do this in your plumbing career ever," and fixed the pipe with no safety equipment by himself in about 20 minutes.
Oh, no.
The hotel's manager, who was a 60-ish-year-old Trinidadian woman, spent 6 of the 16 hours trying to urge us to fix it with pressure in the system, entirely ignoring the explanation of that being impossible by my boss. Then she explained to us how Donald Trump would be the savior of American society and a return to Christian values. Okay.
I mean, that's perfect, like, sort of like small business tyrant, right? Is like, I really need you to, like, die. But by the way, also, this Donald Trump guy, amazing.
Amazing, yeah.
Hail Satan.
Nobody was hurt. No real damage was done to most of the property besides the HVAC and some of the tools and parts they had in the basement. But a bunch of people dealt with no running water or working heat in a hotel overnight in 20-degree Fahrenheit weather. And my boss billed them for 20 hours in all parts at the highest hourly fee he could get away with because, to quote him, "Fuck that lady." Love the pod. Solidarity forever. New Jersey fucking sucks.
It's not that bad, guy.
Yeah.
I love New Jersey.
All right. Uday. If the people want more Uday, where can they... Oh, fuck. We have to do the next episode. It's going to be on Chernobyl. It's going to be on Chernobyl. No, we're keeping it under 3.5. Uday. If the people want more Uday, where can they find more Uday?
I have a blog, Home Signal. I'll send a link along in case you guys want to put it in the description. I'm on Mastodon and on Twitter at A320LGA. I think on Mastodon it's like mastodon.social.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Great. Bye.
Please do not eat. Okay. Bye.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Bye. Feel better.
Thank you.
All right.
Do you think I can split this into like 2 episodes for release?